The morning Clara Bennett's funeral notice hit the Sterling family attorney's desk, Margaret Sterling read it twice, set it face down on her mahogany side table, and called her personal assistant to cancel the courier before the envelope ever reached her son. She did not cry. She did not hesitate. She simply reached for her phone and said, with the kind of calm that only comes from years of practice, "Make sure Nathan doesn't see this." The woman had known about Clara for months, had known and had said nothing, and had buried that information the same way she buried every inconvenient truth, quietly, efficiently, and without apology. If you've ever loved someone deeply and lost them before you got the chance to say what mattered, stay with this story until the very end. Hit like and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Not in the way important things usually arrived at Nathan Sterling's office. Not by courier with a signature requirement. Not through his assistant's careful screening system. Not flagged and filed and scheduled for review. It came in a plain white envelope, tucked between a charity gala invitation and a quarterly earnings summary, misrouted through the building's main reception desk by a new hire who didn't know better. By the time Nathan's executive assistant, Priya, realized it had bypassed her, Nathan had already opened it himself. He'd been sitting at his standing desk, jacket off, tie loosened, working through a presentation deck for the Meridian acquisition. The kind of afternoon that ran into evening without him noticing. The kind he'd built his entire adult life around. Structured, controlled, moving forward. He picked up the envelope without looking at it, split it open with a letter opener the way he opened everything else, and unfolded a single handwritten page. He read it once. Then he sat down. He hadn't sat down in the middle of the workday in 7 years. The letter was from a woman named Donna Hartley. She identified herself as Clara Bennett's neighbor and emergency contact. Her handwriting was careful and even, the kind that came from someone who'd composed the letter many times in their head before putting pen to paper. She wrote that Clara had passed away 6 weeks earlier, a cardiac event, sudden and without warning, at 32 years old, and that she was writing to Nathan Sterling because his name appeared in a sealed document Clara had left in her kitchen drawer with instructions that it be mailed only in the event of her death. Donna wrote that she had spent 6 weeks trying to decide whether to send it, whether she was doing the right thing, whether Clara would want this. She'd finally decided that what Clara would want didn't matter as much as what the children needed. The children. Nathan read that paragraph 3 times. There are 2 little girls, Donna wrote, Hazel and Lily. They turned 6 in March. They are currently staying with me while the county works out what comes next. They are good girls, they are scared, and they deserve to know where they come from. Nathan sat in his office while the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him turned from amber to gray, and he did not move for a long time. He'd met Clara Bennett at a startup conference in Austin 7 years ago. He was 28 and already running a company that Forbes had called One to Watch. She was 25, working as a product designer for a small healthcare tech firm, and she'd argued with him in front of 50 people about the ethics of data monetization with the kind of calm, methodical confidence that made him feel, for the first time in years, like he was talking to someone who didn't care who he was. They dated for 11 months. It was not a clean, cinematic relationship. It was complicated by his schedule, his mother's opinions, his inability to fully separate himself from the relentless machinery of Sterling Technologies. Clara had tried. She was honest in the way that sometimes felt brutal. She told him when he was being distracted, told him when he was performing warmth instead of feeling it, told him she didn't want to be a fixture in his life when she wasn't actually present in it. The breakup had been mutual in the way that most things are mutual when one person has been slowly withdrawing for months, and the other finally says out loud what both of them already know. There were no screaming matches. There was one long, quiet dinner, and then Clara left, and Nathan told himself she was better off without the complications that came with his life, and then he went back to work and kept going. He hadn't known she was pregnant when she left, or at least, that was what he believed, sitting in his office with the letter in his hand. That was the version of the story he'd been living inside for the past 6 years. The letter suggested there might be another version. He called Donna Hartley's number that same night. It was past 10 when he dialed, and she picked up on the second ring like she'd been waiting. Mr. Sterling. Her voice was tired and careful. Mrs. Hartley. He cleared his throat. I received your letter. I figured you had. You don't strike me as the kind of man who sits on things. He didn't know what to say to that. He'd spent the past 4 hours trying to figure out the right thing to say, and he still didn't have it. I need to understand what happened. With Clara. With the girls. There was a pause on Donna's end. He heard the sound of a television in the background being turned down. What do you want to know? She said. Everything. Another pause. Longer. That might take a while. I'm not going anywhere, he said, and for the first time in years, he meant it completely. Donna Hartley had lived next door to Clara and the twins for 4 years. She was 63, recently retired from 20 years of teaching 3rd grade, and she described herself as someone who minded her own business until minding her own business stopped being an option. She'd watched Clara raise Hazel and Lily largely alone, watched her work remotely, and stretch every dollar and drive 2 hours to the nearest pediatric specialist when Lily went through a stretch at age 4 where her heart rate kept spiking during routine checkups. She'd watched Clara be, by every observable measure, a devoted and competent mother who was also quietly, consistently exhausted. She never said much about their father, Donna told him. The girls knew they had one, somewhere. Clara didn't lie to them about that, but she'd say, that's a story for when you're older, and then she'd change the subject, and they'd let her, because kids usually do when they can tell a question hurts. Did she? Nathan stopped. Did she ever say why she didn't tell me? Donna was quiet for a moment. She left a letter for you too. I'll mail it. But since you're asking, the things she said to me over the years in bits and pieces, she believed that if you knew, your family would take over. She'd met your mother once, at some event, early on in your relationship. She didn't say much about it, but she said it was enough. Nathan closed his eyes. He knew exactly what that meant. He didn't need Donna to explain it. The girls, he said, how are they? They're grieving. Her voice was direct, no softening. Hazel cries quietly, at night, when she thinks nobody can hear. Lily has stopped eating much. They're holding each other up, which is what they've always done, but 6-year-olds shouldn't have to be each other's main support system. A beat. They're not bad, Mr. Sterling. They're just broken right now, the way kids are when the person who held their world together isn't there anymore. They need someone who's going to stick around, not visit, not check in, stick around. He heard something in her voice that wasn't quite a challenge. It was more like a warning, the kind of person issues when they've watched enough people let children down to know how common it is. I'll be there, he said. She said, and the sound carried a full paragraph's worth of skepticism. He told Priya at 7 the next morning that he needed a week. Priya Kapoor had been his executive assistant for 4 years. She was 31, precise, and constitutionally unflappable. She looked at him across the kitchen island of his Seattle penthouse with the expression she reserved for situations she hadn't been briefed on, and said, "A week for what?" Personal. Nathan, you haven't taken a personal day in the entire time I've worked for you. I know. The Meridian call is Monday. The board deck is due Wednesday. Your mother has a dinner on Friday that you RSVP'd to in January. Reschedule what you can. Delegate what you can't. He paused. The dinner. Send apologies to my mother. I'll call her myself. Priya set down her coffee cup. She looked at him with something that wasn't quite concern, more like the practiced assessment of someone recalibrating everything she thought she knew about the next 7 days. Is everything okay? No, he said, which surprised them both. But I'm working on it. He called his mother from the car on the way to the airport. Margaret Sterling answered on the first ring, the way she always did with him, quickly, attentively, as though her attention were a gift she offered selectively, and he should be aware of that. Nathan, what a nice surprise. Is it? He said. A pause. He heard her set something down. Glass against marble, probably. Her living room in the Pacific Heights house. That's an odd tone for a Thursday morning. I got a letter, he said, from a woman named Donna Hartley about Clara Bennett. The silence that followed was less than 2 seconds long, but it was different from her normal pauses. A normal Margaret Sterling pause was calculated. This one was something else. "I see," she said. "Did you know?" He kept his voice flat. He'd been practicing this conversation for 12 hours, and he still didn't fully trust himself in it. "About the girls. Did you know Clara was pregnant when she left?" "Nathan, yes or no, Mom?" Another pause. "It's not that simple. It really is. I found out afterward, not before. I want you to be clear on that." Her voice had shifted into the register she used in boardrooms, controlled, persuasive, laying groundwork. "I learned about the pregnancy months after Clara ended things with you. I had someone make inquiries." "You had someone make inquiries? Into whether she was planning to make any claims? Into what the situation—" "She wasn't making claims." His voice went hard and quiet. "She was hiding because of you. She was protecting a narrative that served her. She was protecting her children from being absorbed by this family," he said. "And based on what I'm learning, she wasn't wrong to be worried." "Nathan," her voice sharpened, "she kept your children from you. Whatever you think of my choices, that was her decision. And your decision was to make sure I never found out." She didn't deny it. That was the thing about his mother. She rarely lied outright. She redirected, she omitted, she reframed. But she didn't deny it. "I was protecting you," she said. "You were building something. You were at a critical stage, an unexpected—" "Don't." The word came out harder than he intended. "Don't finish that sentence." The line was quiet. "I'm going to find them," he said. "I'm going to bring them home. And I need you to understand that however this unfolds, it's going to unfold on my terms, not yours. And if I'd like to be involved, then you'll earn that, the same way I'm going to have to earn it." He paused. "I'll call you when I'm settled." He hung up before she could respond, which was something he hadn't done since he was 19 years old and leaving for college. It felt both petty and necessary. He sat in the back of the car and stared at the highway unspooling ahead of him and tried to figure out what a person was supposed to feel in a moment like this. What he felt was not clean. It was not a single thing. It was grief for Clara, who had carried something alone that she shouldn't have had to carry alone, and anger at his mother, and anger at himself for building a life that made Clara believe she had to hide, and something underneath all of that that he couldn't name yet, something that felt like standing at the edge of a very large thing and not being able to see the bottom. The town of Orafield, North Carolina was 3 hours from the nearest major airport. He drove it himself in a rental car he'd picked up without telling anyone which agency, on roads that narrowed progressively until he was following a 2-lane county route through stands of longleaf pine. The coast was somewhere to the east. He could smell it before he could see it, that particular salt and cedar combination that his GPS claimed was 4 miles away. Donna Hartley's house was a pale blue 2-story on a street with wide gravel shoulders and mailboxes mounted on weathered wood posts. The kind of neighborhood where people knew each other's names and the hours of the day by what cars were in which driveways. Nathan sat in the rental for a moment after he parked, looking at the house. There was a bicycle on the porch, small, pink, with streamers on the handlebars that had been worn down to stubs. Beside it, another one. Same size, same pink, but without the streamers, with a small dent in the front fender. He got out of the car. Donna answered the door before he knocked. She was a compact woman with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of face that had spent a lot of time outdoors. Not sun-damaged, just weathered and honest. She looked him up and down the way a person does when they've been forming an opinion of someone for weeks and are now checking the reality against their expectations. "Mr. Sterling," she said, "Mrs. Hartley. Thank you." She nodded once and stepped back to let him in. The house smelled like baked something. He couldn't identify it, just warmth and sugar and something faintly lemony. The entryway opened into a lived-in living room with bookshelves along 2 walls and a television that was off, and 2 small backpacks sitting by the couch, one purple and one green. "They're in the backyard," Donna said. "They don't know you're coming. I thought it was better to let you decide how to handle the introduction." He stopped. He hadn't thought this far. He'd planned the flight, the drive, the arrival, but he hadn't planned this specific moment. That's probably right. There's no probably about it. What you say in the next 10 minutes is going to matter for a long time. She looked at him steadily. You should know that Hazel is the one who asks questions. Lily is the one who watches. If you try to perform something for Hazel, Lily will see through it. Keep that in mind. He nodded. Also, she said more quietly, they had a hard morning. Don't expect a lot. Don't ask for a lot. I won't. She looked at him for another moment. Then she moved toward the back of the house, and he followed. The backyard was small and shaded by 2 large oak trees. There was a garden along the far fence. It was too early in the season for much, just the beginning of something green, staked with little handwritten markers he couldn't read from this distance. A plastic table with 2 chairs was set up near the back door, and on the table were crayons and paper. 2 little girls sat at the table. He had seen photographs. Donna had sent 3 through email, small and slightly blurry, the kind taken on an older phone, but photographs had not prepared him for this. He didn't know what he'd expected. He didn't know what a person expected when they drove 3 hours to meet the children they didn't know they had. They looked like Clara. That was the first thing. They had her coloring, that specific warm brown of her hair, the slight curl at the ends that she'd always complained about and he'd always liked. They had her posture, the particular way she'd held her shoulders, like she was always gently bracing for something. One of them, the one on the left, drawing with a red crayon, looked up first. She had Clara's directness in her eyes, the kind of gaze that assessed a situation without trying to appear to be assessing. The other kept drawing, but her crayon slowed. Girls, Donna said, this is Mr. Sterling. He knew your mama. He came a long way to say hello. The one who'd looked up, Hazel, Nathan assumed, kept looking at him. Her expression was not hostile exactly. It was the expression of someone who had learned recently that the world could change without warning and was waiting to see what kind of change this was. Hi, she said. Hi, he said. His voice came out quieter than he'd intended. The other one, Lily, finally looked up. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him with Clara's eyes, and the expression on her face was something he didn't have words for yet. Something between wariness and an emotion he couldn't name. He crouched down so he wasn't standing over them. He didn't know if that was the right thing. He just knew that standing felt wrong. I drove a long way, he said. Mrs. Hartley told me you were here. I'm sorry it took a while to get here. Where were you before? Hazel asked. Seattle. That's far, she said. It is. Lily had gone back to her drawing. She was pressing harder with the crayon now. He could hear it from where he crouched, that specific pressure of a child working through something. Did you know our mom for a long time? Hazel asked. He thought about lying. He thought about a softer version of the truth. He landed somewhere in the middle. I knew her for about a year, a few years ago, before you were born. She was really special, smart. She always said what she meant. Hazel considered this. She always said what she meant, she repeated, like she was testing the phrase. Yeah, she did. The backyard was quiet except for birds somewhere in the oak trees. A lawnmower started up a few houses down and then stopped again. Lily set down her crayon. She looked at him directly for the first time. Are you going to make us leave? She said. The question hit him somewhere in the center of his chest. No, he said. I'm not here to make you do anything. He paused. I'm here because I wanted to meet you. And because... He stopped. He didn't have the right language yet. He wasn't sure there was a right language for this. Because your mom mattered to me, and I wanted you to know that she had people who cared about her. Lily looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her crayon and went back to drawing. Hazel was still watching him. What's your name? She asked. Your whole name. Nathan Sterling. She said it quietly to herself like she was committing it to memory. Then she picked up a blue crayon and added something to her drawing, a shape, angular, like a house or maybe a mountain, and didn't say anything else. Donna appeared at Nathan's shoulder. Come inside, she said quietly. Let them finish. He stood up slowly, his knees complaining in the way they'd started doing somewhere around 34. He followed Donna back inside and stood in her kitchen while she put a kettle on. "You did okay," she said. "I don't know what I did." "You crouched down. You didn't promise them anything you can't keep." She set 2 mugs on the counter. "That's a decent start." He leaned against the counter and looked at the window above the sink, which faced the backyard. He could see the tops of the girls' heads over the plastic table. Hazel's bent over her drawing. Lily's straight, looking at something he couldn't see. "Donna," he said. "The letter Clara left. For me." She went to a drawer beside the refrigerator and took out a small white envelope. His name was on it in Clara's handwriting, which he recognized instantly. The slightly slanted cursive, the careful loops on the capital letters. He'd read hundreds of handwritten notes from her in the years they were together. Little things left on counters, on pillows, tucked into jacket pockets for him to find. He didn't open it. He held it. "When you're ready," Donna said. "There's no rush." He turned the envelope over in his hands. He thought about everything that was inside it. The explanation, the apology, the version of events she'd spent years composing in her head. The letter she'd hoped no one would ever have to read. The letter she'd written anyway, because she was Clara, and Clara prepared for the things she was afraid of. He put it in his pocket. The family court process, as Nathan's attorney explained it over a series of increasingly frank phone calls, was not going to be simple. Nathan had biological standing. He could establish that through DNA testing, but establishing standing was not the same as having custody. The girls had been in Donna Hartley's informal care for 6 weeks. The county had opened a case. A social worker named Gretchen Vale had been assigned, and Ms. Vale, by reputation, was thorough and unhurried and skeptical of wealthy men who appeared out of nowhere claiming children. "She's going to investigate everything," his attorney David Park said. "Your lifestyle, your income, your support network, your parenting history." "I don't have a parenting history." "Right. So she's going to look at that and at what you're proposing in terms of stability, and she's going to make a recommendation to the court. This could take months." "Months?" "Nathan, you can't just—" David paused carefully. "You can't apply the same approach here that you apply to acquisitions. You understand that?" "I know. The girls have to be considered, their adjustment, their grief, their current environment." "I know," he said again. "The best thing you can do right now is demonstrate stability. Stay in the area. Be present and consistent. Don't throw money at it. That will read wrong. Just be there." It was, in some ways, the most straightforward advice David had ever given him. It was also, Nathan realized, the thing he was least practiced at. He rented a furnished apartment in Orafield, 2 bedrooms, on a quiet street 8 blocks from Donna's house. He didn't mention the second bedroom out loud. He didn't want it to feel like a statement. He just needed it there. Priya managed the Meridian situation from Seattle with the help of Nathan's COO, a capable and long-suffering man named Vincent Cho, who had been waiting 5 years for Nathan to trust him with more. Nathan sent a company-wide memo stating that he was managing a family matter and would be operating remotely for the foreseeable future. And then he watched from a distance as the company didn't collapse, which was mildly instructive. He ate breakfast at a diner called Lula's on Main Street most mornings because it opened at 6, and the coffee was real, and the woman who worked the counter, a woman named B, who appeared to be about 70 and offered no conversational small talk whatsoever, suited his mood perfectly. He visited Donna's house every afternoon. He didn't stay long at first, 20 minutes, half an hour, sitting at the plastic table in the backyard while the girls drew or played or, mostly, tolerated his presence with the particular wariness of children who had recently learned that adults were not always reliable. Hazel asked him questions. Not every day, but regularly. The kind of questions that children ask when they're genuinely trying to understand something, unmediated by the social calculations adults learn to run first. She asked him what he did for work, and he said he ran a technology company, and she asked what that meant, and he tried to explain it, and the explanation felt inadequate in a way he hadn't expected. "So you make things?" she said. "Software mostly, programs, things that help other companies run." "Do you like it?" He'd never been asked that, not in those terms, Not in a long time. I used to, he said. I'm not sure right now. She seemed to accept this. Mama liked her job, she said. She said it was important because if you didn't like your job, you'd be grumpy all the time. She thought about this. She was kind of grumpy sometimes anyway. He almost laughed. Yeah, that sounds right. Lily rarely addressed him directly in those early weeks, but she watched him. Donna had been right about that. He would catch her watching him from across the yard or from behind Hazel's shoulder, and her expression was not hostile. It was more like she was running some kind of internal calculation, accumulating data points, not ready to reach a conclusion. He read Clara's letter on his second night in Orafield. He sat at the kitchen table of the rented apartment with a glass of water he didn't drink, and he opened the envelope, and he read. Clara's handwriting filled 3 pages. The tone was not what he'd expected. It wasn't angry, wasn't apologetic, wasn't sentimental in the way he might have anticipated. It was Clara, direct and clear-eyed and honest in the way that had always required him to rise to meet it. She wrote that she'd found out she was pregnant 8 weeks after leaving him, that she'd spent 2 weeks trying to decide what to do, not about the pregnancy. She'd known almost immediately what she wanted, but about him, whether to tell him. She wrote that she'd gone back and forth on it more times than she could count, that it had not been an easy or clear-cut decision, that she wanted him to know that. Then she wrote about meeting his mother. It wasn't the event Donna had mentioned, the conference, the early months of their relationship. It was something else. She wrote that 2 months after the breakup, before she'd found out she was pregnant, Margaret Sterling had called her, had suggested they meet for coffee, had been, as Clara put it, gracious and warm and utterly clear about what she wanted, which was for Clara to understand that Nathan's future didn't have room in it for the complications that came with a sustained personal attachment. He set the letter down. He picked it up again. His mother had called Clara, before anyone knew about the pregnancy. His mother had called Clara and had, in Clara's careful phrasing, made her feel that disappearing was the sensible choice. And then 2 months later, when Clara found out she was carrying his children, she'd made the calculation that the woman who had effectively warned her away from her son would not, upon learning about twin girls, simply step back and let things take their natural course. I'm not saying this to make you angry at her, Clara had written. I'm saying it because I want you to understand the math I was doing. I was scared. I didn't have money or lawyers or a family with influence. I had 2 babies and a job I could do remotely, and a neighbor named Donna who brought me soup when Lily was sick. I made the choice that felt like the safest one. I have thought about it every year since, especially when the girls ask questions I don't fully know how to answer. I don't know if I was right. I know I was trying. The last page was shorter. She wrote about Hazel and Lily with the particular precision of someone who had spent 6 years memorizing 2 people. She wrote that Hazel processed things out loud and needed to be heard before she could settle. That Lily processed inward and needed space before she could open up. That both of them were braver than she'd ever managed to be. I'm writing this because I hope you never have to read it. But if you are, if you're sitting somewhere with this in your hands, then I need you to know something. They are the best thing I ever did. The absolute best. Whatever you're feeling right now, whatever you're deciding, please let that be the thing you hold on to. Not the mistake. Not the years. Them. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time after he finished. Outside, Orafield was quiet. Small-town quiet, the kind that felt different from the city, less absent of sound and more filled with a different register of it. Wind in whatever trees were outside his window, a dog somewhere on the next block. The distant sound of water he kept forgetting was the ocean. He folded the letter along its original creases and put it back in the envelope. He thought about Clara at 25, sitting in an apartment somewhere, doing math she shouldn't have had to do alone. He thought about 6 years of birthday parties he hadn't known to miss. He thought about Lily's face when she'd asked him if he was going to make them leave. He didn't sleep much that night. But by the end of the second week, Gretchen Vale arrived to conduct her first home visit at Donna's house. She was a compact woman in her 40s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the demeanor of someone who had seen every version of every story and was not interested in the performance of any of them. She spoke with Nathan for 40 minutes in Donna's dining room, with the girls occupied in the backyard and Donna tactfully elsewhere. You have no parenting experience, she said, not as an accusation, as a fact requiring acknowledgement. No. You have a demanding career, significant travel history, and a lifestyle that has, until very recently, been structured entirely around the needs of one person. Yes. You're asking me to consider placing two 6-year-olds who are currently grieving their mother with a man they met 2 weeks ago. I understand how it looks. She wrote something in her notebook. Tell me something, Mr. Sterling, and I'd like you to think before you answer. She looked at him over the reading glasses. What are you prepared to give up? He'd thought about this. He'd had 2 weeks to think about it, sitting in a rented apartment in a small town, watching his company run competently without him, visiting 2 small girls who were slowly, cautiously deciding whether he was worth the risk. The schedule, he said, the constant availability, the next quarter thinking, the image of whoever I was in that life. He paused. I don't have a clean answer. I don't have a list. I just know that the thing that mattered most in my life before last Thursday wasn't actually a person, and I think that's the problem I've been living with for a long time, and these are my daughters. He stopped. The word daughters still felt strange in his mouth. Not wrong. Strange in the way that real things felt when you were still adjusting to them. I'm not going to perform something for you. I'm just going to be there. Every day. For as long as it takes. Gretchen Vale wrote something else. She closed her notebook. I'll be back in 2 weeks, she said. In the meantime, keep doing what you're doing. Show up. Stay consistent. Don't make promises you'll retract. She stood. And for what it's worth, children know the difference between someone who came because it was the right thing to do and someone who came because they couldn't imagine not coming. She gave him a look that was not quite a smile. Figure out which one you are. That afternoon, he arrived at Donna's at his usual time. The girls were at the kitchen table doing something with colored paper and a glue stick. Donna was in the garden. He sat down across from them. Hazel looked up immediately. You came again? I said I would. She considered this. You've come every day. I have. She looked at him with the particular gravity of a 6-year-old working through something important. Are you going to keep coming? He looked at her. He looked at Lily, who wasn't looking at him but whose hands had stilled over the colored paper. Yes, he said. I'm going to keep coming. Hazel nodded once, with the solemnity of someone accepting a formal agreement. Lily picked up her scissors and went back to cutting. But her shoulders, he thought, had dropped about half an inch. Like something had shifted, like something small had released. It wasn't much, but it was something. The 3rd week was when Nathan stopped counting days. He wasn't sure exactly when it happened. Somewhere between the Tuesday morning, Hazel asked him to read the back of a cereal box out loud because she liked the way he said words differently. And the Thursday afternoon, Lily placed a drawing on the table in front of him without looking at him and walked away. And he picked it up and saw that it was 2 stick figures holding hands under a large tree, one tall and one small. And he sat with it for a long time, trying to figure out if he was reading too much into it or not enough. He stopped counting because counting implied he was waiting for something to end. And somewhere in the 3rd week, he stopped waiting for something to end and started just being where he was, which was a small coastal town that smelled like salt and pine resin, visiting 2 6-year-olds who were slowly, painstakingly deciding whether he was worth the effort. He did not rush it. He was not always good at not rushing things. His entire professional life had been structured around compression. Compress the timeline, accelerate the outcome. Move faster than the competition expected. In Orefield, that instinct had nowhere to go. He couldn't accelerate grief. He couldn't compress trust. He tried once, in the 4th week, to suggest a day trip to the beach. Something organized, something with an itinerary. And Hazel had looked at him with Clara's eyes and said, "We went to the beach with Mama last summer." And that was the end of that conversation. And he'd gone back to Donna's kitchen and stood there for a minute and then said to Donna, "I did that wrong." "Yep," Donna said, without looking up from the dishes. "What should I have done?" "Asked first, or not suggested anything at all and waited for one of them to bring it up." She handed him a dish towel. "Dry those." He dried the dishes. It was not something he'd done regularly since his 20s, and he was mildly inefficient at it, and Donna pointed this out. He was starting to understand that Donna Hartley's version of kindness was fundamentally practical, and that it suited him better right now than almost any other kind. The girls attended a small elementary school on the east side of town called Crestwood. They'd been going since Clara enrolled them at the beginning of the school year, and the principal, a soft-spoken man named Mr. Trevino, had called Donna after Clara's death to say that the staff would do everything they could to maintain the girls' routine. Nathan met with Mr. Trevino in the 5th week, not to announce anything, just to introduce himself and understand the situation. Mr. Trevino received him carefully, the kind of careful that comes from knowing a situation is complicated and not wanting to make it worse. "They're good students," he said. "Hazel participates. Lily is quieter, but her work is strong. Since their mother—" He paused, choosing words. "Since February, there have been some adjustment issues. Lily went through a period where she was falling asleep in class. Hazel had an incident with another child in the cafeteria." "What kind of incident?" "The other child said something about Hazel not having parents. Children aren't always—" He stopped. Hazel corrected him, verbally, loudly. Nathan absorbed this. "What did she say?" Mr. Trevino looked at him steadily. "She said she had a mother, and her mother was better than anybody else's, and she wasn't going to sit there and listen to someone talk about her." A pause. It was not entirely unlike what most adults would want to say in the same situation. It was just considerably louder. Nathan nodded. He wasn't going to pretend that didn't make him feel something. "I'd like to introduce myself to their teachers," he said, "if that's appropriate." "I think it would be helpful," Mr. Trevino said. "Consistency helps children in this kind of situation. Knowing that the same people are going to keep showing up, that tends to be what matters." He kept hearing that. Consistency. It had never been a word he'd applied to himself in a personal context. In business, he was consistent. He showed up, he delivered, he followed through. But personal consistency was a different thing, and he was starting to understand that he had spent most of his adult life conflating the two. On a Friday afternoon in the 5th week, Hazel decided she wanted to teach him to play a card game she and Lily had invented. It had no fixed name. She called it the flower game that day, though she mentioned it had been called other things before. And the rules were elaborate and only partially explained before play began. And Nathan suspected they were being adjusted in real time to ensure that he kept losing. He kept losing. "You're not very good at this," Hazel observed. "I'm aware. Lily is better at it than me, but I'm the one who tells people the rules." She shuffled the cards with the confidence of someone who had been doing it for years, though her technique was objectively chaotic. Cards went in multiple directions. She collected them without embarrassment. "Mama always lost too. She said it was because the rules weren't fair. But the rules are fair. She just wasn't paying attention." "I think I'm not paying attention either." "You keep looking at Lily." He glanced up. Lily was at the far end of the porch, looking at something in the garden. She'd been quiet all afternoon, quieter than usual, which was a particular kind of quiet that he'd been learning to read. "Is she okay?" he said. Hazel shuffled the cards again. "She gets sad on Fridays sometimes. Mama used to take us for ice cream on Fridays after school. It was a thing they had." Nathan was quiet. "We didn't go last Friday," Hazel said, "or the Friday before. I told her we could go with Donna, but Lily said it's not the same." She set the cards down. She looked at them instead of at him. "She's right. It's not the same." He sat with that for a moment. He thought about suggesting ice cream, and then he stopped himself because he was trying to learn the difference between doing something because it felt good to do and doing something because it was what was actually needed. He wasn't sure yet which this was. "Hazel," he said, "what did your mom usually get for ice cream?" Hazel looked up. "Strawberry. Always strawberry. She said the other flavors were trying too hard." He almost laughed again. He kept almost laughing in these conversations at things that were also making his chest hurt. "That sounds like her." Hazel looked at him with something he hadn't quite seen on her face before, a sharpening of interest, a curiosity that was more personal than the questions she'd been asking. "You really knew her, huh?" "I did." "What was she like?" "When she was younger?" "She was—" He thought about it honestly. "She was exactly like she sounds, from what you've told me. She said what she thought. She didn't have much patience for things that felt fake. She was really smart, but not in the way that people show off, just the way that made her see things clearly that other people missed. He paused. She was also stubborn, like genuinely stubborn. Once she'd decided something, that was it. Hazel was listening intently. Me and Lily are stubborn, too. I noticed. Mama always said we got it from her. Hazel considered this, but maybe we got it from both sides. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her, this 6-year-old who was processing the geometry of her own existence with the focused intensity of someone much older, and he felt the particular weight of being looked at by her, and of knowing that whatever he was in this equation was just beginning to take its shape. Lily came in from the porch. She sat down at the table without saying anything, picked up the card deck, and started to reorganize it with the focused attention she brought to most things. Hazel watched her. Then she looked at Nathan. "Can we get ice cream?" she said. "Not today, maybe next Friday. From the place on Clement Street. That's where we used to go." "Yeah," he said. "Next Friday. We can do that." Lily didn't look up from the cards, but the reorganizing slowed down, became more deliberate, like someone who was paying close attention to a conversation and needed their hands to be doing something while they did. The social worker's second visit came at the end of week 5. Gretchen Vale arrived at Donna's house on a Wednesday afternoon, reviewed Donna's notes, spoke with the girls separately in the living room while Nathan waited in the kitchen, and then sat across from Nathan at the dining table with her notebook open and her glasses on this time. "The girls speak positively about you," she said. "That's—" He stopped himself from saying good, because he wasn't sure that was the right register. "I'm glad. Hazel says you're bad at card games." "She's not wrong." "Lily said," Gretchen checked her notebook, "that you come every day and you don't make a lot of noise." She looked up. For a 6-year-old describing an adult, that's a fairly considered compliment. He felt something loosen slightly in his chest. How is the process moving? The DNA results confirmed paternity, which you already knew. The estate side of things, Ms. Bennett had very little, which simplifies that. Your background check is clean. The character references your attorney submitted are, frankly, more numerous and more detailed than I usually see. She made a notation. The question that remains is practicality. You are currently operating your company remotely from a rented apartment. What's your long-term plan? He'd been thinking about this. He'd had the conversation with David, with Vincent, with Priya in segments over the past several weeks. "I'm restructuring my operational role. My COO is taking on more day-to-day leadership. I'll remain involved, but the constant on-site requirement, that ends." He paused. "I want to be based here, or wherever the girls are, not wherever the office is." "Orafield? Possibly, or somewhere nearby. I don't want to uproot them from their school if we can avoid it. I don't want to uproot them from Donna." He looked at Gretchen directly. "They've lost enough. I'm not going to be another thing that takes something away from them." She wrote something. "There will be a hearing in approximately 6 weeks. The judge will consider my recommendation, the guardian ad litem's assessment, and your demonstrated relationship with the children. I want to be clear that my recommendation is not predetermined, Mr. Sterling. It will be based on what I believe serves Hazel and Lily's best interests, and that determination is still in progress." "I understand. What I can tell you is that you are not behind where I would expect you to be at this stage." She closed the notebook. "Keep doing what you're doing. Specifically, keep not trying to accelerate it." He nodded. "One more thing." She stood. "Your mother has submitted a formal request to be considered as an interested party in the custody proceedings." He went still. "My attorney will respond to that," he said, and his voice came out very level, which cost him something. Gretchen gave him a measured look. That might be worth a direct conversation as well. Courts don't love complicated family dynamics in cases involving young children. Easier for everyone if those dynamics are addressed rather than litigated. He thanked her. She left. He sat at Donna's dining table for a moment, and then he went and found Donna in the backyard where she was doing something to the garden markers with a pen. "My mother filed to be considered an interested party," he said. Donna didn't look up. How does that affect things? It complicates them. It signals she's going to contest or at least complicate the custody arrangement. It means I need to... He stopped. I need to talk to her. Yes, Donna said. You do? She's going to say she's acting in the girl's interest. People usually believe that about themselves. Donna straightened up and looked at him. Does she know them? Hazel and Lily. Has she met them? No. Then she's acting in her own interest and calling it something else. She went back to her pen and her markers. Talk to her. Don't let it sit. Sitting makes it worse. But he called his mother that evening from the apartment. She answered with the warmth she deployed when she knew a difficult conversation was coming. Not false warmth, exactly. More like the version of herself she wore the way some people wore armor. Nathan, I've been hoping you'd call. I heard about the filing, he said. A pause. I have legal standing to... You have standing to make this harder than it needs to be. Yes, I know. He sat down on the couch in the rented apartment. The furniture was generic and slightly uncomfortable, and he'd stopped noticing it, which told him something about how much his standards had adjusted in 6 weeks. What do you want? To be part of my granddaughter's lives. Her voice shifted into something more genuine. Not that he trusted it, but it registered. Nathan, whatever you think of my choices, these are my blood. I am not the monster you've decided to make me. I haven't decided anything. I'm dealing with the situation in front of me, which is 2 6-year-olds who are grieving and scared, and a legal process that needs to be as straightforward as possible. He paused. Filing as an interested party doesn't help that. I filed because I don't know what your intentions are. You disappeared to a small town 6 weeks ago, and I have heard almost nothing. I told you I'd call when I was settled. And are you settled? He thought about it. He was in a rented apartment in a town he hadn't known existed 2 months ago, visiting children he'd just learned were his, managing a company from a laptop, eating breakfast at a diner where a woman named B had recently started recognizing his usual order. Settled was probably not the right word. I'm here, he said. That's what I can tell you. I want to meet them. I know. Nathan? Not yet. He kept his voice even. I'm not saying never, I'm saying not yet. They've had enough people appearing in their lives without preparation. If you meet them, it's going to be on their timeline. Not yours, not mine, theirs. The silence on the line was the kind his mother used when she was recalibrating. He'd grown up learning to read her silences the way other people read expressions. I want you to withdraw the filing, he said. I want you to trust that I am handling this. And I want you to understand that the version of this family we're building, it's not going to look like what you would design. You're going to have to be okay with that. You're asking me to step back entirely. I'm asking you to step back for now. There's a difference. He rubbed the back of his neck. I know that's hard. I know you didn't set out to be the reason any of this happened, but some of it happened because of choices you made. And we both have to live with that. A pause. Withdraw the filing. Let me do this right. Another silence. Longer. I'll speak to my attorney, she said finally. Not agreement, not refusal. Something in between that he'd have to accept. That's enough for now, he said. After he hung up, he sat in the apartment and thought about his mother, about who she was underneath the management of herself, about whether there was a version of this where she became something his daughters could trust. He didn't know. He genuinely didn't know, and not knowing was uncomfortable, and he sat with the discomfort because there was nothing else to do with it. The Friday ice cream trip happened as promised. He picked the girls up from Donna's at 4:15. Hazel was ready at the door before he knocked. Lily took an extra 3 minutes that nobody mentioned. They walked the 6 blocks to Clement Street. Hazel talking the whole way about something that had happened in school involving a substitute teacher and a misidentified capital city. Lily, walking on Nathan's left, slightly behind, occasionally glancing at store windows. The ice cream shop was called Marigold's. It was small and yellow-fronted and had a hand-lettered chalkboard in the window. A bell above the door announced their arrival to a teenager behind the counter who appeared to be doing homework. Hazel ordered mint chip. The teenager looked at Lily. Lily looked at the case for a long time. Her face was doing something. Not crying, nothing like crying, but something underneath the surface was moving. She looked at the strawberry, and then she said very quietly, "Strawberry, please." The teenager scooped. Nathan ordered nothing for himself, and then Hazel looked at him and said, "You're supposed to get something," with the authority of someone who considered this a rule. So he got a small cup of whatever was closest to the scoop, which turned out to be sea salt caramel and was genuinely very good. They sat at one of the small tables outside. The afternoon was still warm for the time of year, the particular mild warmth of coastal spring that never quite decided to be summer. Hazel ate her ice cream methodically and continued her story about the substitute teacher. Lily ate hers slowly, looking at it more than eating it, and Nathan didn't push, didn't comment, just let the afternoon be what it was. At some point, Hazel went back inside to ask the teenager about a flavor she'd seen being restocked, and it was just Nathan and Lily at the small table, and the quiet between them was the specific quiet that existed when both people in it were thinking about the same person. "Mama always got 2 scoops, Lily said. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at her ice cream. She said one wasn't worth the trip. She was right, he said. Lily turned the cup in her hands. I only got 1. You can get 2 next time. She didn't say anything, but she ate more of it than she had been. Not finishing it, but more. Hazel came back with a small sample cup of something lavender-colored and the conclusion of the substitute teacher story. The conclusion involved the correct capital city, an apology, and an offer of bonus recess, which Hazel described as an adequate resolution. Lily listened without comment, but her face had shifted into something that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite not. Walking back, Lily moved up alongside Nathan instead of behind him. Not close, not holding his hand or anything like that, just alongside. Equidistant between him and Hazel. He didn't make anything of it, he just kept walking. Dead. The bedtime story started by accident. It was a Wednesday evening, late in the 6th week. Donna had a book club she attended to, a thing Nathan hadn't known about until she mentioned she needed to leave by 6:30. The girls were staying at Donna's while he was still technically a visitor, and on this particular Wednesday, Donna asked if he'd mind staying until she was back, which she expected would be around 9. Nathan said he didn't mind. He made dinner, which was pasta with jarred sauce because his cooking skills did not extend far beyond that, and Donna had shown him the cabinet where the pasta was kept. Hazel watched him cook with critical attention and told him he'd used too much water. Lily set the table without being asked, placing everything with the quiet precision she brought to most tasks. They ate. It was not a remarkable dinner. Hazel talked. Lily ate neatly. Nathan mostly listened and occasionally answered questions. Afterward, he washed the dishes. His technique had improved, per Donna's standards, while the girls did the part of the evening routine they'd established with Donna, which involved a specific order of bathroom, teeth, and the choosing of pajamas that apparently required more deliberation than he would have expected. At 7:45, Hazel appeared in the kitchen doorway in pajamas featuring cartoon otters. Donna reads to us, she said, before bed. He dried his hands. What are you reading? We're in the middle of a book about a girl who finds a dragon egg. She tilted her head. You could do it, if you want. He followed her to the room the girls shared at Donna's. Twin beds with mismatched comforters, a shelf with books arranged by size rather than subject, a drawing taped to the wall that he recognized as Lily's from the style of it. Lily was already in her bed, reading ahead in the dragon egg book, which she closed when he came in. She didn't say anything about the reading, she just watched. The book was called The Last Egg, and it was about a girl named Marin who found an egg the size of a watermelon behind her grandmother's greenhouse. Donna had left a bookmark at chapter 9. Nathan sat in the chair beside the shelf. It was the chair Donna used, a little worn on the left armrest, and opened to chapter 9. He was not a practiced reader aloud. He found this out quickly. He hit rhythms wrong and had to recalibrate, and there was a dragon character whose dialogue he wasn't sure how to pitch. Deep? Something in between? and Hazel told him after the second line that he sounded like a news anchor trying to be a dragon, which was the most accurate criticism he'd received in recent memory. "Show me how," he said. Hazel showed him. She did it with unselfconscious commitment, full dragon voice, slightly raspy, with a particular emphasis on the sentence endings that was, he had to admit, much more effective than his version. "Like that," she said. "I can't do that." "Try." He tried. It was not as good as Hazel's version, but it was better than the news anchor version, and Hazel's expression shifted into something that wasn't quite approval, but was adjacent to it. Lily, he noticed, had pulled her comforter up to her chin and was watching him with more animation in her face than he'd seen in weeks. He read 2 chapters. The dragon talked. Marin made a series of poor decisions that were going to have consequences in later chapters. A secondary character appeared who was clearly going to be important. At the end of chapter 10, Hazel said, "One more," and he said, "Donna's rule or your rule?" And she said, "A little of both," which he accepted as an honest answer and read chapter 11, which ended on a cliffhanger involving the egg beginning to crack at an inconvenient moment. "That's a good stopping place," he said. Hazel groaned. Lily said nothing, but she pulled her comforter tighter. He closed the book. He set it on the shelf. He stood up, and for a moment he didn't know what the protocol was. He'd never done this, never stood in a room with children he was responsible for at the end of a day, never felt the specific weight of this particular quiet. "Good night," he said. "Good night," Hazel said, already arranging herself under her covers with the decisive finality she brought to transitions. Lily looked at him from her bed. Her dark eyes were tired and something else, not quite soft, not a thing he could name exactly. "Good night," she said. He turned off the lamp and went back to the kitchen, and he sat down at Donna's kitchen table and was still sitting there when Donna came home at 8:50, earlier than expected because the book club had gotten into a disagreement about plot structure. "They're asleep," he said. "Good." She set down her bag. "How was dinner?" "Pasta. I used too much water, apparently." "You did," she said, and poured herself a glass of water. "You read to them?" 2 chapters, 3. She looked at him for a moment. Not a long look, just enough. "Same time next Wednesday?" she said. "I'll be here," he said. The custody hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in late spring. In the weeks leading up to it, Nathan did 3 things that his attorney had not asked him to do and that were not strategic and that he did anyway because they felt necessary. The first was to meet with Hazel and Lily's pediatrician, a woman named Dr. Anita Russo, who had been Clara's primary choice for the girls since they were infants. Dr. Russo had a small practice in the next town over and had known Clara as a patient mother. Meticulous about checkups, proactive about questions, occasionally frustrated when the rural healthcare infrastructure couldn't provide what she needed. She spoke about Clara with the directness of a professional who respected the dead by being accurate about them rather than sentimental, and Nathan found himself grateful for it. She also told him, matter-of-factly, that Lily had had a borderline cardiac concern flagged at her 4-year checkup and had been monitored since. It was most likely a benign structural variant, but it required continued follow-up, and the nearest pediatric cardiologist was an hour and 40 minutes away, and Clara had driven that distance 4 times already. He wrote down the name of the cardiologist. He wrote down the dates of the follow-up appointments. He wrote down everything Dr. Russo told him with the focused attention he usually gave financial projections, which Dr. Russo noticed, and which seemed to shift something in her assessment of him, because her manner warmed slightly by the end of the meeting. The second thing he did was call Vincent Cho and begin the formal process of restructuring his operational responsibilities. This involved a series of conversations that were difficult in the way that giving up control is always difficult, especially for someone who built a company from nothing and associates the company with his own identity in ways he was only now beginning to examine. Vincent was professional and calm and did not gloat, which Nathan appreciated. The third thing was harder. He asked Donna if she would stay in the girls' lives. Formally, functionally, not just as a historical figure, but as a presence, a consistent one. Donna looked at him across her kitchen table. She had a coffee cup she'd been holding for several minutes without drinking from. "You think I'd just disappear?" she said. "I don't know what the arrangement looks like going forward. I don't want to assume." Those girls have been next door to me for 4 years. Hazel learned to tie her shoes in this kitchen. Lily spent an entire afternoon once teaching me how to draw horses, which I still can't do, and she had the patience to sit with me through 17 attempts. She set the coffee cup down. I'm not a flight risk, Nathan. It was the first time she'd used his first name. He wasn't sure she'd noticed. I'm going to look for a house, he said, in Orafield, somewhere they can stay in their school, close enough that nothing changes too much. He paused. If that's okay. If having us nearby is... Don't be an idiot, she said. Of course it's okay. The morning of the custody hearing, Nathan was up at 5. He'd slept about 4 hours, which was normal lately. He made coffee in the apartment's small kitchen and sat at the table with it and did not look at his phone, which was unusual for him. Usually the phone was the first thing. He just sat and drank his coffee and thought about the day in front of him. He thought about what Gretchen Vale had said, about courts not loving complicated family dynamics. He'd heard through David that his mother had in fact withdrawn the interested party filing 2 weeks after their phone call, without announcement or discussion. He didn't know what had shifted. He hadn't asked. He'd sent her a text that said thank you, and she'd replied with call me when things are settled, and that was where they were. He thought about the girls who didn't know about the hearing. He and Donna had discussed whether to tell them, and they'd decided Donna's call more than his, and he deferred because Donna's read on the girls was still sharper than his own, that the legal process was adult machinery that the girls didn't need to be aware of yet. They knew Nathan was in their lives. They knew something was changing. That was enough for now. He thought about Clara. He thought about the letter, which he'd read several times since that first night, and which he now kept in the drawer of the bedside table in the apartment, not as a reminder of what he'd lost, because he hadn't had it to begin with, but as something more like a bearing, a fixed point to navigate from. At 7:30, he put on a suit for the first time since he'd arrived in Orafield. It felt slightly wrong, like a costume for someone he used to be. He put it on anyway. The courthouse was a 40-minute drive. David met him in the parking lot and they walked in together, and the hearing was not dramatic in the way that courthouse scenes in films are dramatic. It was procedural and careful and took most of the morning. Gretchen Vale presented her findings. The guardian ad litem presented hers. Nathan's attorney made the case for custody. The judge, a woman in her late 60s who gave nothing away with her expression, asked Nathan 3 questions directly, and 2 of them were about the girls' school and medical care, and 1 was about his long-term residential plan. He answered them clearly and honestly, and the judge wrote something, and the hearing recessed. In the corridor afterward, David said, "That went well?" And Nathan said, "How can you tell?" And David said, "She didn't look at you skeptically when you talked about the school. That's usually a good sign." This did not feel like sufficient information for the magnitude of what was being decided, and Nathan said so, and David said, "Welcome to family court," with the kind of sympathy that comes from having seen this many times. The decision came 14 days later, by letter. Nathan read it standing at the kitchen counter of the apartment, still in the clothes he'd slept in because he'd been awake since 3. He read it once. Then he put it face down on the counter and pressed both hands flat against the laminate surface and took several slow breaths. Full custody. Granted. A 6-month review period with continued social worker contact, a provision for extended family visitation to be determined pending review. He picked up his phone. He called Donna. "Well?" she said before he could speak. "It's done," he said. His voice came out rougher than he meant. "They said yes." A silence on the line. Then Donna said, "Good." And the word was short, but it wasn't small. "I need to tell them," he said. "I need to figure out how to—" "Come over," Donna said. "They just got home from school. We'll figure it out together." Well, he told them at the kitchen table. He'd thought about how to frame it. He'd thought about language. In the end, he said something close to the simplest version, that the people who made official decisions had decided that he was going to be their dad, and that they were going to live with him, and that nothing about Donna or their school or their neighborhood was going to change except that they'd have a different house. Hazel listened to the whole thing with her elbows on the table and her chin in her hands. When he finished, she said, "So you're actually our dad now, like for real." For real, he said. She considered this. You were already kind of our dad, she said. You just didn't have the paper. He didn't have an answer for that. Lily hadn't said anything. She was looking at the table. He watched her and tried to read the silence, but Lily's silences were still sometimes opaque to him. He was getting better at it, but not fast enough, never fast enough. Then she looked up. Is our room going to have a window? She said. It took him a second to catch up. What? At the new house. Our room. She looked at him steadily. Mama's apartment had bad light. I want a window. Yeah, he said. He had to clear his throat once. It's going to have a window. Lily nodded. She looked back down at the table. Hazel had reached over and was holding her sister's hand without drawing attention to it, a gesture so practiced and natural that it was clearly something they'd been doing their entire lives. Lily let her. Donna, standing by the sink, was looking at the window above it, at whatever was or wasn't in the backyard, and her expression was the specific expression of someone who has held a great deal for a long time and is quietly allowing themselves to put some of it down. Nathan sat at the table with his daughters. The kitchen was the same kitchen it had always been. The light was the same afternoon light. Nothing looked different, and everything was. The house on Birch Hollow Road had been empty for 14 months. The realtor, a cheerful woman named Pam who spoke in a continuous stream of optimistic qualifiers, described it as having great bones and a few personality quirks, which Nathan had learned in 3 weeks of looking at houses meant that something was either structurally ambiguous or cosmetically alarming. In this case, it was both. The back porch had a soft spot in the decking that needed replacement, and someone in the 1990s had made a decision about the kitchen wallpaper that remained difficult to justify. But the yard was deep and shaded by oaks older than anyone currently living on the street, and there were 3 bedrooms, and the 2 rooms at the end of the hall had windows, east-facing, which meant morning light, which Pam told him was very desirable, and Nathan had already known because Lily had said she wanted a window, and he'd quietly added good light to the list of non-negotiables without mentioning it to anyone. He brought the girls to see it on a Saturday morning. Hazel walked through every room making assessments out loud, testing light switches with the thoroughness of a building inspector, opening closets and reporting their dimensions in units she invented on the spot. Lily walked more slowly, touching door frames, looking out windows, doing the internal calculation she brought to everything. The room at the end of the hall, the larger of the 2, had a window that faced the backyard and the oaks, and the light that came through it in the morning was the color of something almost amber. Lily stood in the middle of the empty room for a long moment. This one, she said. For you and Hazel? She shook her head. For me. She paused. Hazel should have the other one. She wakes up earlier and she's louder in the morning, and she'd wake me up. From the next room, they could hear Hazel telling Pam about the structural advantages of having 2 closets instead of 1. That's probably true, Nathan said. Lily looked at the window again. The light is good. Yeah, he said. It is. He put an offer in on the house that afternoon. Bakutang. Moving day was a Tuesday in early June, 3 weeks after the custody decision. The girls didn't have much. Clara had lived lightly, practically, keeping what mattered and releasing what didn't, and the things that mattered were mostly books and drawings and the specific small objects that children accumulate and that adults cannot fully account for. A collection of smooth stones, a set of paintbrushes that had never been washed quite clean enough, a stuffed rabbit named Gerald who had 1 eye and was apparently non-negotiable. Nathan had bought furniture, beds, dressers, a kitchen table, and had tried to involve the girls in some of the decisions and had learned quickly that involving Hazel in furniture decisions meant a 2-hour conversation about the structural integrity of bunk beds and whether a loft configuration would technically count as closer to the ceiling fan, which was apparently important. He'd bought them separate beds in the end, each one chosen with input, and had set up the rooms the weekend before the move so they weren't arriving to an empty house. Donna drove over with a casserole and a box of kitchen supplies she'd decided Nathan could not be trusted to have bought on his own. And she was right. He had not bought a colander, which she pointed out while standing in his kitchen, holding one she'd brought from her own cabinet. I have a colander, he said. Where is it? A pause. It's on the list. She installed the colander in his cabinet with the efficiency of someone who had been setting up households for longer than he'd been alive, and then she walked through the girls' rooms and made 2 suggestions about the bookshelf arrangement and 1 observation about where the lamps were placed that he implemented immediately. "You're going to be okay," she said, in the kitchen doorway before she left. He wasn't sure if she was talking to him or the general situation. "I know." "No, you don't," she said, not unkindly, "but you're going to be anyway." Ishk. The first night in the house was harder than he'd expected, and he'd expected it to be hard. Hazel fell asleep without apparent difficulty. She was adaptable in the way that extroverts sometimes are, capable of orienting herself to new environments quickly because she engaged with them immediately rather than waiting to feel comfortable. She'd rearranged 3 things in her room before dinner and declared it done. Lily was different. He'd read to them. The Last Egg, Chapter 19, the dragon having now fully hatched and presenting several practical complications for Marin's household. And Hazel had fallen asleep before the chapter ended, which happened regularly and which he'd learned to just continue reading through rather than stopping. He finished the chapter, closed the book, turned off Hazel's lamp. Lily's lamp was still on when he looked in through her doorway. She was sitting up in bed, not reading, just sitting. Gerald the one-eyed rabbit was in her lap. She was looking at the window. At the dark version of it, no light to speak of at this hour, just the reflection of the room and herself in it. He knocked on the door frame. "You okay?" She turned to look at him. She shrugged, which was not a no. He came in and sat on the edge of the bed, the way he'd started doing when reading. Not too close, leaving space. "New place takes getting used to," he said. Not a question. She looked at Gerald, straightened one of his ears. "Mama always checked on us at night," she said. "After lights out. She'd come in and we'd pretend to be asleep." "Did she know you were pretending?" Lily's mouth moved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Probably. She'd tuck the blanket again, even though it was already tucked, and then she'd go." He sat with that for a moment. "I can do that," he said. "If you want. After the light's out, I'll come check." She looked at him, evaluating. She was always evaluating. He'd come to respect it rather than be unsettled by it. She wasn't suspicious of him anymore, not in the early way. She was just careful, and she'd come by that carefully. "Okay," she said. He stood up. "Try to sleep. I'll come by." He went to the hallway, waited 60 seconds, and came back. Lily was lying down, eyes closed, the rabbit against her chest. He reached over and tucked the blanket. It was already fine, but he tucked it again. And then he went back to the hallway. He stood there for a minute in the dark. He thought about all the nights Clara had done this alone. He thought about all the nights he hadn't known to do it. He stood in the hallway of the house on Birch Hollow Road, and he was not doing well, if he was being honest. But he was there. And he went to the kitchen and drank a glass of water and went to bed and slept badly, and was up before 6 to make breakfast. The first month in this house was an education in the specific physics of living with children. He had known, intellectually, that children created disorder. He had not fully appreciated what this meant, applied to a house where he was the only adult. It meant that the kitchen counter was never completely clear. It meant that shoes appeared in places that were not near the door. It meant that art projects occupied the dining table for days at a stretch, and that asking about a timeline for completion was received as a hostile act. It meant that Gerald the rabbit had once been left at Donna's, and the subsequent evening had a specific quality of difficulty that he did not want to repeat, and he had driven to Donna's at 8:15 at night to retrieve Gerald, and had done so without complaint, which Lily noted the next morning with the acknowledgement that was her version of gratitude. Not thank you exactly, but the absence of the careful reserve she usually maintained. He was bad at some things. He burned the grilled cheese on 3 separate occasions before he got it right, and Hazel was genuinely baffled by this, since she considered grilled cheese to be a basic competency. He forgot, twice, to sign permission forms that came home in backpacks, and Mr. Trevino's secretary called him with the kind of patient professional tolerance reserved for parents who are trying and not quite there yet. He misjudged Lily's mood on a Thursday afternoon and tried to talk when she needed quiet. And she told him, with the flat directness she'd inherited from Clara, that she needed him to stop talking for a while. And he stopped. and then sat with the minor injury of being told to stop talking until he recognized it for what it was. A child trusting him enough to say what she actually needed rather than managing her own discomfort to spare his feelings. That last one he counted as progress, even though it didn't feel like it in the moment. Margaret Sterling called in the middle of July. Not a text this time. An actual call, which she rarely initiated because she preferred to be the one who chose the time and format of a conversation, and phone calls gave the other person too much control. Nathan looked at the screen and answered. "I'd like to come," she said. No preamble. "To Orefield. I'd like to meet them." He'd known this was coming. He'd been waiting for it the way you wait for weather you can see building on the horizon. Not dreading it exactly, just watching it approach. "I'll talk to them first," he said, "and to Donna, and then we'll set a time." "That's very procedural." "Yes." A pause. "I'm not going to be difficult, Nathan." "Mom." He chose his words. "You've been difficult about this since before you knew what this was. I need you to understand that walking in here is not the same as walking into a business meeting. You don't get to manage the room." "I know that." "Do you?" The line was quiet. "I know I understand that some of what happened is on me. I'm not asking you to forgive it. I'm asking you to let me try something different." It was the most direct thing she'd said to him in years, maybe ever, on a personal matter. He wasn't sure whether to trust it, and he also knew that not trusting it at all wasn't fair, and he sat in the tension between those two things like he sat in most uncomfortable things lately, without resolution, because some things didn't resolve cleanly. 2 weeks, he said. "I'll call you." He told Hazel and Lily about Margaret on a Sunday morning. He'd made pancakes, successfully this time, which Hazel acknowledged with the nod of a quality assessor finding work acceptable. And they were at the table and the morning was unhurried, which was the right condition for conversations that required space. He said he had a grandmother they hadn't met, their dad's mother. Her name was Margaret, and she lived in San Francisco, and she wanted to visit. Hazel put her fork down. "We have a grandmother?" "On my side, yes." Hazel looked at Lily. Lily was looking at Nathan with the focused attention that meant she was processing something several layers down. "What's she like?" Hazel asked. He thought about how to be honest without being complicated. She's formal. She's smart. She runs a lot of things, and she's used to being in charge of most situations." He paused. "She and I have had some disagreements about how to handle things, but she's family, and I thought you should at least meet her." "Did she know about us?" Lily asked. The directness of it hit him sideways, the way Lily's questions often did. He took a breath. "She knew your mom existed. She didn't know about you specifically until recently." Lily was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Was she nice to our mom?" This was the question he hadn't fully prepared for, which was his own fault for underestimating Lily. He held it for a moment. "She wasn't as kind to your mom as she should have been," he said. "That's something I've talked to her about. That's something that was wrong." Lily looked at her plate. Hazel was watching him. "But she's your mom," she said. "She is. So she's still family even if she did something wrong." It was not a question, exactly. It was Hazel working through a piece of moral architecture out loud, the way she worked through most things. "Yeah," he said. "That's more or less it." Hazel picked her fork back up. "Okay," she said. "She can come." Lily didn't say okay, but she ate more of her pancake, and she didn't say no, and with Lily, those were sometimes the same thing. Chassis. Margaret arrived on a Saturday morning in late July, in a car Nathan hadn't arranged, which meant she'd organized her own transportation, which meant she'd prepared. She stood at the front door of the house on Birch Hollow Road in clothes that were more understated than her usual. No jewelry except small earrings, a linen blazer over a simple shirt, the kind of effort that comes from someone who has thought about the impression they're making and has calibrated down from their instinct. Nathan opened the door. His mother looked older than she had in February. Not dramatically. She was still precisely herself, still carried herself with the posture she'd maintained for 40 years of professional life, but something around her eyes was different. He didn't say anything about it. Mom. Nathan. She looked past him, not rudely, just the instinctive scan of someone entering an unfamiliar environment. He stepped back to let her in. The girls were in the living room. He'd told them she was coming at 10. It was 10:03. Hazel was sitting on the couch with a book she was definitely not reading. Lily was at the drawing table in the corner, actually drawing, which was where she went when she was managing something. Margaret came into the living room and stopped. He watched her face. He'd seen his mother manage her expression in hundreds of high-stakes meetings, had watched her maintain composure through conversations designed to destabilize her. This was different. Something crossed her face when she saw the girls, something that moved too quickly for him to fully read, but that came from somewhere unguarded. "Girls," he said. "This is your grandmother, Margaret." Hazel looked up from her book. The pretense dropped. She looked at Margaret with the frank assessment she brought to new people. "Hi," she said. "Hello, Hazel," Margaret said. Her voice was measured but not stiff. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." "Nathan said you run things," Hazel said. A pause. "That's one way to describe it. What do you run?" "Several businesses. Some charitable foundations." She glanced at Nathan briefly, something in the glance that might have been requesting guidance, which was not a look he'd seen from her before. "I like to keep busy." "Me too," Hazel said. "I don't like sitting still." "Neither do I," Margaret said. Lily had turned around at the drawing table. She was looking at Margaret with the evaluating quiet that Nathan had learned to be patient with, but that he knew unnerved most adults, who expected children to be more legible. Margaret looked back at her. She didn't try to fill the silence with chatter. She just looked and waited. "You have nice earrings," Lily said finally. Margaret touched one reflexively. "Thank you. They were my mother's." Lily looked at them for another moment, then turned back to her drawing. Margaret exhaled. Not dramatically, just a breath's worth of something releasing. She looked at Nathan, and in her look was something he didn't often see in her. Uncertainty. Real uncertainty, not performed humility. "Sit down," he said. "I'll make coffee." The visit lasted 4 hours, which was longer than he'd planned, and felt, at the end of it, like both enough and not enough. Margaret was careful. More careful than he'd ever seen her be in a social context. She didn't try to buy the girls, didn't arrive with gifts, didn't deploy the kind of lavish attention that wealthy grandparents sometimes use to compensate for complicated history. She just sat in his living room and talked to them, and when Hazel dragged her to see the backyard and explain in detail the organizational system she'd developed for the garden markers, Margaret went without complaint and asked questions that were not condescending. At one point in the afternoon, Nathan was in the kitchen refilling the coffee, and he could hear, through the window above the sink, Hazel's voice in the backyard explaining something about the oak trees, and then a lower voice, his mother's, asking something he couldn't make out. And then Hazel's laugh. He stood in the kitchen with the coffee pot in his hand. He didn't know what to do with his mother. He didn't know if trust was possible or what form it would take if it was. He didn't know if she'd changed or if she was being strategic, or if, at 67, the two things had started to look the same to her. He didn't know, and he was learning to operate without knowing, which was possibly the most significant shift in him since February. Lily had brought her drawing to show Margaret before Margaret left. It was a picture of the house on Birch Hollow Road, identifiable by the oaks, with 3 figures in front of it. The figures were different heights. Lily described who was who without sentiment. Here's the house, here's Hazel, here's me, here's Nathan. And then she folded it and held it. "Would you like to keep it?" Margaret asked. Lily looked at her. The calculation again, the private processing. "Yes," she said, and handed it over. Margaret held it. She held it with both hands carefully, and for a moment her face did the thing it had done when she'd first walked in, moved somewhere unguarded. "Thank you," she said. "I'll take very good care of it." Lily nodded, satisfied, and went back to the drawing table. After Margaret left, Nathan stood on the porch for a while. The afternoon had gone soft, and the oak shadows were long across the yard. He heard, from inside, Hazel asking Lily something, and Lily's shorter answer, and then what sounded like the beginning of the card game, the flower game, the game with the rules that shifted. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. She's remarkable. They both are. Thank you for today. He typed back, yeah. Then he went inside. Mtis. The call from the Sterling Technologies board came on a Wednesday night, 3 weeks into August. He'd known it was coming. He'd been half expecting it since May, when he'd begun the formal process of restructuring his role. The board had been patient in the way that institutional patience works, which is to say they were patient until the quarter ended and the projections required discussion. The chairman, a man named Gerald Forsyth, who had been on the board since before Nathan was 30, called at 7:15 p.m., which was after the girls' dinner but before reading time, and Nathan stepped out to the back porch to take it. We need to talk about the Meridian deal, Gerald said. Vincent's handling it. Vincent is capable. He's not you. A pause. Nathan, the board has concerns, not about your personal situation. We understand there are extenuating circumstances, but the operational gap isn't a gap, Nathan said. I've been available, remotely, but available. There's a difference between available and present. The Singapore partnership needs face time. The Meridian integration has 3 open structural questions that are sitting because nobody wants to move them without you. Gerald paused again. We're looking at a 4-day trip. Singapore, Tokyo, a stop in New York for the Meridian team. We'd need you in 2 weeks. Nathan was quiet. I know the timing isn't ideal, Gerald said. I have daughters, Nathan said. It was the first time he'd said it to Gerald, actually said it like that. Not I have a family situation or personal circumstances, but this, plain and factual. 6 years old. I just moved them into a new house. They started the school year last week. A pause from Gerald's end. I understand that, but I need a week to think about it. Nathan, a week, Gerald, I'll call you. He hung up and stood on the back porch in the evening air. The oaks were dark shapes against a sky going from orange to purple at the edges. He could hear, through the screen door, Hazel telling Lily that her card was wrong, and Lily saying that her card was not wrong, and the familiar escalation of an argument that would resolve in about 90 seconds through a process he still didn't fully understand. He sat down on the porch steps. He thought about Singapore. He thought about what he'd told Gretchen Vale in Donna's dining room, that he was restructuring, that he was done with the constant on-site requirement. He thought about what he'd told himself, in the apartment in Orefield before he had the house, that the thing that mattered most in his old life wasn't actually a person. He thought about Lily asking if her room would have a window. He thought about Gerald on the phone saying the board has concerns in the tone that meant the board would like Nathan Sterling to remember that Nathan Sterling was first and foremost a business asset and that assets should be deployed where they generate return. He called David Park. What are my contractual obligations to the board in terms of travel requirements? He said. David paused. In your current CEO agreement, significant travel is expected but not defined. It's somewhat open to interpretation. Why? Because I need to rewrite the agreement. A longer pause. Nathan, is this about the Singapore thing? Because if you're thinking about... I'm thinking about what the company looks like with me as executive chairman and Vincent as CEO. And I need to know what that transition looks like and how long it takes and whether the board will go for it. Silence on the line. That's a significant... I know what it is, David. You built that company. It's been your identity for 10 years. I know that too. He looked at the oaks. The sky was darker now, the orange edge fading. But it can't be the only thing I built. And I think I've known that for a while. And I didn't change it until I had a reason. And now I have 2 reasons, and they're 6 years old, and they had a hard enough year without me disappearing to Singapore for a week every time the board has concerns. David was quiet for a moment. I'll draft some preliminary structure options. Thank you. This is going to raise some eyebrows. Probably. He stood up. Let them raise. Machi. He called Gerald Forsyth back 4 days later, not a week. He'd made the decision in 4 days, which was fast, by some measures, and by others was 10 years overdue. He laid out the proposal, an executive chairman role that kept him involved in strategy, the major decisions, the relationships that required him specifically. Full CEO authority to Vincent, with a transition period of 90 days. His travel commitments would be limited, defined, and planned in advance. Gerald was quiet for a long time. "This is a real change," Gerald said. "It is." "The market won't love the announcement." "The market will adjust. Vincent is good. He's been ready for 2 years and I didn't give him the room." He paused. "This is the right structure for what the company needs now and for what I need now." "And what you need is to be home at 6, Nathan said. "Most nights. That's what I need." Gerald was quiet again. Then, "I'll take it to the board." "I know what the recommendation will be, Gerald. I'm not asking for the board's preference. I'm telling you the direction." A pause that contained, Nathan thought, a fair amount of recalibration. "I'll take it to the board," Gerald repeated, which was now a different sentence than it had been 30 seconds ago. He told the girls at dinner that same night. Not the details, not stock prices and board dynamics and the precise meaning of executive chairman, just the thing that mattered to them, which was this. He'd given some of his job to someone else so he wouldn't have to travel as much. So he'd be here. Hazel absorbed this. "You gave your job away? Part of it? Is that allowed?" "Yes, I own the company, more or less." She thought about this. "But you liked your job." "I like this more." She seemed to accept this with the pragmatic flexibility she applied to information that fit neatly into her existing understanding of a situation. "Okay," she said, and returned to the pasta, which tonight was correctly hydrated. Lily hadn't said anything. He looked at her. She was looking at her plate. Then she said, without looking up, "You're going to be here for the school thing next week." It wasn't a question. He'd almost missed it in his schedule 3 weeks ago. A school family event, something with a science fair component. Mr. Trevino had sent home a note. He'd put it in his calendar and then had another call conflict and had started to wonder if he could shorten the call and still make it. "Yes," he said, "I'll be there." Lily looked up. Her eyes held the same evaluation they always did, but there was something else in them now. Something he'd been slowly learning to read, the thing that came through when she'd accumulated enough data points to reach a provisional conclusion. "Okay," she said. That was all. Just okay. But it was the okay of someone who had decided, not for the first time, but perhaps more solidly than before, that the data was pointing somewhere trustworthy. The school event was on a Thursday. He wore a regular shirt, not a suit, not the business costume, and arrived 10 minutes before start time, which Hazel had told him was important. She had a project involving the water cycle that she'd been working on for 2 weeks, and that she'd described to him in considerable detail, and she'd made him quiz her on it the night before in a way that was more like being managed than helping. Lily's project was about deep-sea bioluminescence. She'd made a model out of black cardboard and painted dots that she'd positioned to correspond roughly to actual species distributions in the Pacific. She stood beside it with the composed seriousness she brought to things she cared about. He stood beside her when the teacher came by for assessments. He didn't do anything except stand there, but when the teacher addressed Lily about her method, Nathan saw Lily glance at him once, briefly, with the peripheral awareness of someone checking that something is still where they left it. He was still where he'd left himself. After the assessments, the parents moved around the room. Nathan found himself talking to another father, a man named Dale, whose daughter was in Hazel's class, a man who worked in insurance and drove an old truck and had the easy, comfortable manner of someone who'd been doing the school events for years. They talked about Mr. Trevino's organizational style and the road construction on the main street and the reliability of the seafood place on 5th, and it was a conversation that would not have held Nathan's interest 6 months ago, and held it completely now. On the way home, Hazel sat in the front seat. They'd agreed she could, because Lily claimed cars made her feel like thinking, and the front seat was distracting, and debriefed the entire event from start to finish, including her own assessment of her performance and 2 critical observations about the judging criteria. Lily sat in the back, looking out the window. At a red light, Nathan glanced in the rearview mirror. Lily was already looking at him in the mirror. She didn't look away when he caught it. She just held it for a second. That steady, opaque gaze that was slowly becoming more legible to him, and then she went back to the window. He turned through the light and drove them home. In September, two things happened close enough together that Nathan later thought of them as the same event, though they weren't. The first was Lily's cardiac follow-up. He drove her to the pediatric cardiologist in Milford, an hour 40, same drive Clara had made 4 times, while Hazel stayed with Donna. Lily read in the car, asked one question about the appointment when they were 20 minutes out, does it hurt? And accepted his honest answer, the EKG doesn't, the echo might be a little cold from the gel, without further comment. The appointment went well. The borderline variant was stable, no significant progression, annual monitoring recommended. The cardiologist, a careful man named Dr. Solis, spoke directly to Lily as much as to Nathan, which Lily approved of. He could tell because she answered his questions without the slight withdrawal she did when adults spoke over her. In the parking garage afterward, walking to the car, Lily said, "Mama always stopped for lunch on the way back. There's a sandwich place in Milford she liked. You remember it? It has a blue sign." They found it. Not the exact one, but one that Lily confirmed looked right. And they ate sandwiches at a small table, Lily with a grilled chicken, and Nathan with something involving avocado that was more elaborate than he needed. And they didn't talk about the appointment or the drive or anything consequential. Lily described, in careful detail, the bioluminescence project and what she wished she'd done differently with the model. He listened and asked questions when they were genuine and didn't ask questions when they weren't. On the highway home, Lily fell asleep in the back seat. He drove the last 40 minutes with the radio off, watching the road. The second thing that happened in September was the phone call from his mother. She called on a Sunday evening. He stepped onto the back porch, the same porch where he'd sat when Gerald called about Singapore, where he was increasingly doing the thinking that required air around it. Margaret's voice was different. Not worse, exactly. Quieter. "I've been thinking about Clara," she said. No preamble. He said nothing. He waited. "I've been thinking about what I did. Not in the abstract. Specifically. What I said to her. What I communicated to her about her options. What that must have felt like." A pause. "I don't think I can fix that. I know I can't." Another pause. "But I've been sitting with it, and I wanted you to know that I've been sitting with it, that it's not something I've resolved and set aside." He leaned against the porch railing. The oaks were loud with cicadas. "I appreciate that," he said, and he meant it, more than he'd expected. "How are they?" Margaret asked. "Really?" He thought about how to answer honestly. Hazel is loud and competent, and she manages her grief by staying busy, which is probably not the best long-term strategy, but it's hers, and she's 6, and I'm not going to optimize it. He paused. "Lily is harder to read and also more perceptive than almost any adult I know. She's having some nights that are hard. She doesn't always say so, but I can tell by the morning." He stopped. "They're doing better than when I got here, and not as well as I want them to be, which I think is just going to be how it is for a while. Is there anything I can do?" He thought about it genuinely. "Maybe another visit when things have settled more. Let them set the pace." He paused. "Lily gave you that drawing. That meant something." "I know," Margaret said. Her voice was quiet. "I have it framed. On my desk." He hadn't expected that. He let himself be surprised by it. "Call in a few weeks," he said. "We'll figure out a time." Yeah. October brought rain, then 2 weeks of clean cold light, then the particular golden quality of a coastal autumn that Nathan hadn't known enough to anticipate and found himself looking for in the mornings before the girls were up. He'd started getting up at 5:30, not by alarm, just his internal clock having recalibrated around the shape of the day. Coffee, quiet, 40 minutes of whatever the company needed from Executive Chairman Nathan Sterling that week. And then the house came alive, and the morning became something else entirely. He was burning the toast on a Thursday morning. The toaster had a setting problem he'd been meaning to address for 3 weeks, when Hazel appeared in the kitchen doorway in her otter pajamas and said, "You need to get a new toaster." "I know. It's been burning things since August." "I know, Hazel. There's one at the hardware store on 5th. I saw it when we drove past. It has 2 slots and a bagel setting. I'll look at it today." She came into the kitchen and sat at the table. "Nathan?" He looked at her. She was sitting the way she did when she was about to say something that she'd been working up to, elbows on the table, hands folded, looking at them rather than at him. "At school this week," she said, "there was a form." "What kind of form?" "An emergency contact form for the beginning of the year." She looked up. "I put you first and Donna second." She paused. "And then there was a line that said relationship, and I put Dad." He stood still by the toaster. "I just wanted you to know," she said, "that I put that." He crossed to the table. He sat down across from her. He looked at her. This daughter of his. This 6-year-old who ran her own internal government, who asked questions until she had answers, who had inherited Claire's directness, and apparently some proportion of his own stubborn streak. "I'm glad you did," he said. His voice was not entirely steady. He didn't try to make it steady. Hazel looked at her hands, unfolded them, refolded them. "Lily put it too," she said, "on hers. I saw." He nodded. He didn't trust himself to say more just then. Hazel unfolded her hands one more time and picked up a crayon that was sitting on the table left over from some evening project. A green crayon worn to a stub, and started making small marks on the placemat, the habitual motion of someone who needs her hands occupied while the important thing settles. "I really think you need a new toaster," she said. "Yeah," he said. "I'll go today." He bought the toaster. 2 slots, bagel setting. He brought it home and Hazel installed it with the authority of someone who had suggested the acquisition and therefore had proprietary interest in its deployment. Lily came in from the backyard to observe the process and said that the old one had been a problem for a long time, and it was good they'd finally dealt with it. That night, after reading Chapter 24, Marin and the Dragon attempting something ambitious that was almost certainly going to go wrong in Chapter 25, he went through his standard end-of-evening routine. Lights off in the common areas, door locks checked, kitchen counter cleared of the day's accumulation. He passed Lily's room, knocked once on the open doorframe. She was lying down, eyes open, Gerald tucked alongside. He went in, tucked the blanket. Already fine. Stood for a moment. "Good night," he said. "Good night," she said. He was almost to the door when she said, "Nathan." He turned. She was looking at the ceiling. "The form," she said. "That I turned in at school." "I know," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "It felt right," she said. "When I wrote it." "Okay," he said, the same word she'd given him months ago, the word she used when Data had reached a conclusion. He turned off the lamp. He stood in the hallway in the dark, in the house on Birch Hollow Road, in the town he'd driven to without knowing what he'd find, and he stood there for a while before he went to bed. Winter came to Orafield without fanfare. One morning in late November, Nathan walked out to get the paper. He'd started getting the local paper, which was a thing he'd never done in Seattle, where news arrived in curated feeds tailored to his professional interests, and found the yard frosted, the oak leaves gone, the light coming at a different angle than he'd grown used to. The season had turned while he was paying attention to other things, the way seasons do. The way a lot of things do, he was learning, when you're paying close enough attention to the foreground. He stood on the porch in his jacket and looked at the yard for a moment. There was a bird feeder he'd installed in October at Hazel's direction. She'd seen one at Donna's and conducted a 3-day campaign for one of their own, presenting her case with the methodical persistence of someone who had identified a gap in the household infrastructure and would not rest until it was addressed. The feeder was empty. He'd forgotten to refill it yesterday. He made a note to do it before the girls got up. Inside, Lily was already awake. She was at the kitchen table with a cup of the warm apple juice she'd been drinking since September, a habit she'd had at Clara's apparently. Warm juice in the mornings, one of those small, specific comforts that children carry from one life into the next. She was drawing, as she often was in the morning, and she had the focused stillness she brought to the work she cared about. "Morning," he said. "The bird feeder is empty," she said without looking up. "I know. I'm going to fill it. The chickadees come early, before school. I'll do it now." He filled the feeder in his jacket and bare feet on the cold porch boards, which was not comfortable, and Lily watched him through the kitchen window with the expression of someone overseeing a task being completed to adequate standard. When he came back in, she said, "Thank you." and returned to her drawing, and the morning went on. This was what the days had become. Not dramatic, not the before and after of transformation stories, where everything sharpens and resolves and the light changes quality, just the ordinary accumulation of mornings. Toast that no longer burned thanks to the 2-slot toaster with the bagel setting, the retrieval of homework folders from improbable locations, the navigation of moods that shifted without warning and required recalibration and patience, and sometimes just the acceptance that a person was having a hard morning and the only useful thing was to not make it worse. He was better at it than he'd been in September. Not good. Better. Thanksgiving arrived, and with it the question of what Thanksgiving looked like for the three of them. He'd been thinking about it since early November without fully addressing it, in the way he'd learned to recognize as a pattern in himself, circling a thing rather than landing on it, especially when the thing had emotional weight attached. He finally raised it on a Sunday evening when the girls were on the living room floor with the remains of a board game they'd stopped playing 20 minutes ago but hadn't put away yet. "What do you want to do for Thanksgiving?" he said. Hazel looked up from where she was sorting game pieces by color, which was not a part of the game's rules but was something she did anyway. "What are the options? We could do something here, or go somewhere. Where would we go? My mother's, maybe? San Francisco?" He watched their faces. "Or we could stay here. Donna usually does something." Hazel looked at Lily. Lily was lying on her side, her head propped on one hand, doing nothing in particular, her processing position. "Did Mama do Thanksgiving?" Hazel asked. "She used to," Lily said. "She made sweet potato thing." "With the marshmallows?" "She only did the marshmallows once. She said it was a mistake." "I liked the marshmallows." "You like marshmallows on everything." Hazel considered this a fair characterization and didn't dispute it. She looked at Nathan. "I want Donna's," she said, "but I want it to be ours too, not just Donna's." "What's the difference?" She thought about it. "If we're just at Donna's, it's like we're guests. If we help, it's like it's ours too." He looked at her. The logic was 6 years old and completely sound. "Okay," he said. "We'll do it here. And Donna can come here, and we'll all make it together." Hazel appeared satisfied. Lily had sat up slightly, not dramatically, just enough to indicate that this was an acceptable outcome. "Can we do the sweet potato thing?" Lily asked. "Without the marshmallows. Can you find the recipe?" She considered this. "Mama had a notebook. In the box of kitchen stuff. I think the recipe's in there." Claire's kitchen notebook. He'd seen the box when they'd packed the things from Claire's apartment. Donna had organized it, had kept the essential objects together without making a production of it. The box was in the second bedroom, the one he used as an office. He found the notebook the next morning after the girls were at school. It was a regular composition notebook, the black and white kind, water-stained on the cover and filled with Claire's handwriting. Not the careful handwriting of the letter she'd left for him, but the quick daily handwriting of someone writing things down for practical use. Recipes with annotations, some starred, some crossed out, some with notes in the margins like "too sweet," "cut sugar by half," or "Hazel won't eat this, Lily might." He sat at the kitchen table with it for a while. There was a recipe for sweet potatoes on page 40-something. No marshmallows. A note in the margin. Better this way, actually. Less fuss. The annotation was very Clara. He took a photo of the page. He put the notebook back in the box gently, the way you'd set something down that you didn't want to damage. Thanksgiving at the house on Birch Hollow Road involved ultimately Nathan burning the rolls and Donna making more rolls from scratch without comment, Hazel being placed in charge of the cranberry sauce, a responsibility she executed with focused gravity and then described as her best work to date. Lily following the sweet potato recipe with the precision of someone who had watched it made before and was reconstructing it from memory as much as from the page. And Donna's green bean thing, which she brought in her own dish and which Nathan had learned was a fixed point around which other traditions could organize themselves. Margaret called during dessert, which caught Nathan slightly off guard because he hadn't told her when they were eating. He stepped into the hallway to answer. "I don't want to interrupt," she said. "I just wanted to call." "You're not interrupting. How is it?" He looked back at the dining room. Donna was telling Hazel something. Hazel had a fork raised in a point she was making. Lily was finishing her sweet potatoes with the focused attention she brought to things she'd made herself. "Good," he said. "It's good." A pause. "Nathan, I want you to know I'm working with my attorney on a few things related to the foundation." She paused again. "I'd like to be involved in whatever you're building to honor Clara. I know that's not a simple offer to accept, but I want you to know it's there." He hadn't told her yet about the foundation. He'd mentioned the idea to David in October, sketched it, hadn't moved forward yet because the shape of it kept changing. He wasn't sure how she knew. "I'll call you," he said, "after the holiday." "Take your time," she said. "Happy Thanksgiving." "Happy Thanksgiving, Mom." He went back to the table. Hazel had won the argument with the fork. Lily had gotten a second helping of sweet potatoes. Donna caught his eye across the table and raised an eyebrow, asking, in the shorthand they'd developed over months, whether he was all right. He gave her a small nod that meant yes, later. She returned to her green beans. The foundation had been in his head since spring. He'd mentioned it to David once, in passing, in the context of estate discussions following the custody decision. The idea was loose then, something to do with rural pediatric healthcare, something to honor Clara's work, something that was not a monument or a naming rights situation, but something functional, something that addressed the actual gap that had existed in Clara's life and in the lives of people like her. He'd looked at the numbers quietly over summer. He'd read reports. He'd called Dr. Russo and later Dr. Solis and asked them directly what the infrastructure problem actually looked like from where they sat. Not in the abstract, not in policy terms, but specifically, what did families in rural coastal communities not have access to, and what would change things, and what did changing things actually cost? Dr. Russo had talked to him for 90 minutes, Dr. Solis for 40. Both of them had the slightly surprised quality of professionals who weren't used to being asked operational questions by someone who clearly intended to do something with the answers. By December, he had a framework, not a press release, not a gala, a structure. An endowment that would fund pediatric care coordination in underserved rural communities, transportation assistance, specialist referral networks, the connective tissue between isolated families, and the care that existed but was too far away. The thing that would have made Clara's drives to Milford unnecessary. The thing that might have caught whatever happened to her heart early enough to matter. He named it the Bennett Sterling Children's Health Foundation, Clara's name first. He didn't announce this to anyone before he made the decision, and when he told David, David said, "The board will have opinions about the Sterling name ordering," and Nathan said, "The board can note their opinions." And David moved on. He told the girls on a Sunday afternoon in December, on the couch, which was where the important conversations had started to happen. Not the kitchen table, not the car, but the couch. Something about its geometry that made conversations feel less formal. He explained it in terms he thought they could hold, that there were a lot of families like theirs had been, where doctors were too far away and getting there was hard, and he wanted to use some of his money to help fix that. That it was going to be named after their mom, because it was about the kind of problem she'd dealt with. That it was not a statue or a building. It was something that would actually help people. Hazel listened with her elbows on her knees. "So it's like a donation?" "Bigger than a donation. It's an ongoing fund. It'll keep running for a long time. And it has Mama's name." First, Hazel looked at Lily. Lily was looking at Nathan with the expression that had become, over these months, increasingly readable to him. Not opaque anymore, but something he could usually distinguish between. This was the expression she wore when something had landed in the right place, when the data aligned with something she'd been carrying. "Mama would think that was important," Lily said. "She used to say that the thing she hated most was that there was help, but you couldn't get to it." "I know," he said. "That's what this is for." Lily nodded once. She picked up her drawing from the cushion beside her. She'd been working on something before the conversation, and went back to it. But the quality of her attention was different, warmer somehow, angled slightly toward him even while she was looking at the page. "Can our name be on it?" Hazel asked. "Sterling is already your name." "Not Sterling, Hazel and Lily." She was matter-of-fact about it. Like as thank you people, or whatever it's called. Acknowledgements. Though, if you want, he said. We want, she said, with the authority of someone speaking for both of them, which she sometimes was. Oh shit. He flew to Seattle in January for 3 days, the first overnight trip since Orafield. He'd worked out the logistics carefully. Donna would stay at the house, the girls' routine would not change. He'd call every evening at 7:30. He told the girls 2 weeks in advance. He told them what days he'd be gone and what days he'd be back, and he showed them on the calendar on the kitchen wall. The one with the cats on it that Hazel had chosen and that Nathan privately found slightly aggressive in its cheerfulness. He told them Donna would be there and their schedule would be identical and he would call every night. Hazel said, fine, with the pragmatic acceptance of someone who had already done the math. Lily didn't say anything for a day. On the second day, she asked him, when on Thursday? What time do you land? He checked his flight. 3:40. She worked out the math visibly. So you could be here by 6. I could be here by 5:30 if the drive is good. She seemed to find this adequate. Okay, she said. The Seattle trip was 3 days of compressed efficiency. Vincent had prepared well. The Meridian integration was ahead of schedule in most areas. Gerald Forsyth greeted him with the particular warmth of a man who had accepted a new arrangement and decided to make it work. Nathan sat in meetings and contributed what he was there to contribute and noticed the entire time the low-grade hum of something pulling him back toward the coast. Not anxiety, exactly. More like the natural tension of someone who has somewhere they need to be. He called at 7:30 every evening. The first night, Hazel gave him a detailed account of a school event, and Donna's observation about the bird feeder and a disagreement with Lily about the card game, rules that she described with considerable editorial bias. Lily said hello and was quieter, which was normal. When he said goodnight to Lily specifically, she said, see you Thursday, and that was all, and it was enough. He landed Thursday at 3:41. He was home at 5:22. Hazel was at the kitchen table and said, you said 5:30, to which he said, traffic was light, and she appeared to consider this an acceptable variance. Lily came out of her room when she heard his voice. She stood in the hallway, one hand on the door frame, still in her school clothes. She looked at him for a moment, the evaluation, the calculation. Then she walked down the hall and put her arms around him. Not dramatically, just leaned in with her arms around his middle and stayed there for a moment. He put his hand on the back of her head. She pulled back after a few seconds, turned around, and went back to her room as if nothing had happened. He heard her pick up something she'd been doing, the sound of colored pencils on a hard surface. He stood in the hallway for a moment. Donna, passing from the kitchen with her coat, gave him the look she reserved for situations she'd been expecting and didn't need to comment on. Good trip? She said. Good trip, he said. Thank you. Come for dinner Sunday, she said. I'm making the soup. The foundation's soft launch was in February, on the anniversary of Clara's death. Nathan had not intended the timing to be symbolic. It had simply been the earliest point at which the structure was sound, the legal framework complete, the inaugural grant recipients selected. When he realized, checking dates in January, that the operational launch would fall in the same week as the anniversary, he thought about adjusting it. Then he thought about what Clara would have said about that level of overthinking, and he left it where it was. He put out a brief press release, a small announcement on the Sterling Technologies investor site, separate from company news, noting the establishment of a new private foundation. He did not do a press event. He did not contact the technology press. He sent the announcement to Dr. Russo and Dr. Solis and a list of rural healthcare networks he'd been building relationships with since October. Dr. Russo called him that afternoon. This is real, she said. This isn't a check for a hospital wing with your name on it. No. The care coordination piece, that's the thing that actually moves the needle. I know. How did you know that? Not skeptical, genuinely curious. I asked you, he said. In August, you spent an hour and a half explaining it. She was quiet for a moment. Most people don't listen that long. I'm trying to get better at listening, he said. He got a call from Margaret the next morning. She'd seen the release. Clara's name, she said. First. Yes, that was the right choice. She paused. I'd still like to be involved, if the offer is still open. He'd had time since Thanksgiving to think about it. He'd thought about what his mother's involvement meant, what she brought, what it cost, what it would look like to the girls. Years from now, if the foundation that bore their mother's name also included their grandmother, who had complicated history with their mother's choices. He'd thought about it carefully, and he'd come to a conclusion that felt not comfortable, but honest. There's a board position, he said, advisory. Your expertise in nonprofit governance is real, and the foundation needs it. But I need you to understand that this is Clara's legacy. The direction is not negotiable. I understand, she said, and I need you to understand that if there's ever a point where it feels like it's becoming something else, a sterling brand exercise or a family image management situation, I'll ask you to step back. A pause. That's fair. Okay, he said. Call David. He'll walk you through the structure. After he hung up, he sat at his desk for a moment. The desk in the second bedroom office, the room that also held Clara's box of kitchen things, the notebook. He looked at the box. He opened it and took out the notebook and put it on the desk. Not to read it, just to have it there. March came, and with it the girls' 7th birthday. He'd asked them in January what they wanted. He'd phrased the question carefully. Not what do you want me to buy you, but what do you want the day to look like? He'd learned in 8 months of parenting that those were entirely different questions and produced entirely different answers. Hazel said she wanted a party with her class, and a cake that was both chocolate and vanilla in the same cake, and the card game elevated to a tournament format with a bracket. She described the bracket format in detail that strongly implied she'd been thinking about it since at least November. Lily was quieter about it, which he'd expected. She sat with the question for 2 days and then said she wanted the party too, but she also wanted something that was just them. Not a big thing, just them. He asked her what she meant by just them. She thought about it. Like, where Mama is, she said. I want to go where she is. On our birthday. Can we do that? Clara was buried in a small cemetery in Beaufort, 40 minutes from Orafield, the town where she'd grown up, where her parents had been before her. Donna had told him about it in the early weeks, had offered to take the girls when they were ready. The girls hadn't been yet. Nathan hadn't pushed it. It was the kind of thing that needed to be their idea. Yes, he said. We can do that. After the party, Lily said. Not before. The party should be the party. Okay. And we can bring flowers. Not the funeral kind, the real kind. She thought for another moment. Mama liked wildflowers. She said arranged flowers looked like they were trying too hard. He almost said that sounds like her and stopped himself, because he'd been saying it a lot, and he'd noticed lately that Lily sometimes flinched slightly when adults used that phrase, as if someone else claiming to know Clara was a thing that needed careful handling. We'll get wildflowers, he said. The party was loud and slightly out of control in the way that 7-year-old parties are. 17 children, a backyard event that migrated indoors when the March wind picked up, the bracket tournament that Hazel had organized with poster board and markers, and that generated an unexpectedly intense semifinal involving 2 kids named Cooper and Amara, that Hazel mediated with the impartiality of a very small and very serious judge. The combined chocolate-vanilla cake was structurally ambitious. Nathan had ordered it from the bakery on Clement Street, and the baker had interpreted the brief with more architectural boldness than he'd anticipated. It held together. Mostly. Lily moved through the party at her own pace. Engaged, present, not performing joy she didn't feel, but also genuinely having moments of it, which was, Nathan had come to understand simply how Lily experienced things. She didn't ride the surface of emotion the way Hazel did. She went deeper, which meant the access was slower and cost more and mattered differently. Donna was there. Margaret had sent gifts, appropriate ones, which Nathan noted. She'd paid attention when he told her the girls liked books and art supplies and things to do with their hands. Vincent Cho had sent a card that Hazel read aloud to the party as a whole, which wasn't intended but which Vincent would have appreciated had he known. After the party, after the 17 children had been collected by their respective parents, After the bracket had been archived by Hazel in a folder she'd made specifically for it, after the remnants of the cake had been dealt with and the kitchen returned to baseline, they drove to Beaufort. Donna came. She sat in the back with the girls, and Nathan drove, and nobody talked much on the way. It was late afternoon, and the light was doing the thing it did along the coastal roads in March, flat and silver and wide. The sky, the particular blue that wasn't quite winter and wasn't quite spring. The cemetery was small and well kept, beside a white church Nathan didn't go into. Clara's plot was newer than most of the stones around it, the grass still short over it. A small headstone with her name and dates, and a phrase she'd asked for in a will that Donna had told him about. She meant what she said. He stood back while the girls approached. Hazel had the wildflowers. They'd stopped at a farm stand on the way and found early-season bunches, stems of something yellow and something small and white that the woman at the stand had said were the first of the season. Hazel arranged them in front of the stone with the focused care she brought to things that mattered. Then she stood up and read what was on the stone, moving her lips slightly. Lily crouched in front of it. She didn't say anything out loud. She looked at the stone for a while with the inward stillness that Nathan now knew meant she was in a full-depth conversation with herself, with whatever was important, working through something that only she had access to. After a minute, she put her hand flat against the base of the stone, just for a moment. Then she stood up. She didn't cry at the cemetery. Neither did Hazel. Nathan didn't either, which surprised him. He'd expected to, and instead he just felt the particular weight of a place that holds something irreversible. The specific gravity of it. He stood beside his daughters at Clara's grave and thought about all the things that had led to this exact arrangement, and none of it felt simple, and he didn't try to make it simple. On the way back to the car, Lily walked beside him. She would have liked the party, Lily said. Not to him specifically, just into the air between them. The cake got a little out of hand, he said. She liked things that got out of hand, Lily said. A little. He looked at her sideways. She was looking at the path ahead, at the car in the lot, at whatever was next. Yeah, he said. She did. Well, spring again. A full year since Nathan had opened a letter on a Thursday afternoon and sat down in the middle of a workday. The anniversary of the letter didn't mean anything to anyone else, which was as it should be. He noted it privately, the way you note the passages of time that have reshaped you. He was in the backyard in the morning, refilling the bird feeder, a routine now, the same way coffee was a routine, the same way 5:30 was a routine. And he thought about the man who had been sitting at a standing desk in Seattle 1 year ago, and the distance between that man and this one. The distance was not entirely comfortable to measure. He'd lost things. He'd lost the particular clarity of a life organized around a single purpose. He'd lost the cleanliness of a schedule that answered only to work demands. He'd lost the thing he'd mistaken for identity, which turned out to be closer to armor. He'd also lost sleep, regularly. He'd burned toast and rolls and one memorable pan of roasted carrots that Hazel had eaten anyway and described diplomatically as interesting on the outside. He'd said wrong things on wrong days and said nothing on days when something was needed. He was by any measure an imperfect father, not in the catastrophic way, but in the daily way. The way that involved learning continuously from people who were 7 years old and therefore, in certain respects, more observant than he was. He'd also sat in a hospital waiting room for 2 hours when Lily had a follow-up that ran long, and had not checked his phone once. He'd read 26 chapters of The Last Egg out loud, eventually including a dragon voice that Hazel had upgraded from news anchor adjacent to acceptable. He'd attended 11 school events, gotten the card game rules explained to him 14 times, learned that the bird feeder required specific seed or the chickadees didn't come, and understood, finally, the organizational logic of Lily's drawing materials, which had seemed random and turned out to be completely systematic. He'd become someone's dad, not perfectly, not always gracefully, but daily and present and actually. Summer arrived early that year. By May, the oaks were full and the mornings were warm before 7 and the backyard smelled like cut grass, and whatever was coming up in Lily's section of the garden. She'd taken over a patch along the south fence in April and had been growing things from seed with the same methodical care she brought to everything, labeling each row in her precise printing, watering on a schedule she'd worked out herself. Hazel had no interest in the garden. Hazel had become interested instead in the structural properties of cardboard, which had led to a series of increasingly ambitious construction projects that occupied the dining table and were described with full engineering justification at dinner each evening. He called Margaret on a Sunday evening in May from the back porch. The foundation had made its first set of grants in April. 12 rural healthcare programs, 2 in their county, the rest spread across the coastal southeast. Dr. Russo had sent him a note that was 3 lines long and factual and warm in the way that purely factual things can be warm when they're expressing the right facts. Margaret had been useful, as he'd known she would be. Not easy. She had opinions, and she expressed them clearly, and she pushed back when she thought the direction was wrong, which was not always comfortable and was often correct. They'd had 2 significant disagreements about grant criteria, and one about the public profile of the foundation, and he'd held his position on 2 and deferred on 1, and had been right twice and wrong once, in the way that anyone going into a new area goes. The spring cohort, he said on the phone. The board approved it. I saw David's note. The numbers look solid. They're good programs. Real ones. He paused. There's a clinic in Havelock that serves families who are driving 2 hours for specialist referrals. With the care coordination grant, they're setting up a telehealth system. Dr. Russo says it could affect 400 families in the first year. Margaret was quiet. That's not nothing. No. Clara would have... She stopped herself. Yeah, he said. She would have. He heard the girls through the screen door, Hazel explaining something to Lily at a volume calibrated for presentation rather than conversation, Lily's shorter, quieter response. The rhythm of them, which he'd learned over 12 months without noticing he was learning it. Nathan, his mother said, I know I've said this, but I want to say it again. She paused. I'm glad you went to Orafield. I'm glad you didn't wait for the right time or the right plan. He looked at the oaks. The evening light was doing the golden thing it did this time of year, the late horizontal light that made everything look slightly more significant than it was. I didn't really decide, he said. I just went. That's the same thing, she said. For someone like you, that's exactly the same thing. He thought about that after he hung up. He sat on the porch steps the way he'd sat on them the night Gerald Forsyth called about Singapore, except that everything about this particular evening was different from that one. He was different. Not transformed in the clean literary sense, still impatient sometimes, still capable of getting things wrong in ways that cost something, still learning the vocabulary of a role he'd arrived at too late and had been trying to earn ever since. The door opened behind him. Lily came out. She had her sketchbook under her arm and a colored pencil tucked behind her ear. She sat down on the step beside him, not at a careful remove, the way she'd kept her distance in those early months, but close, the way people sit when proximity is not a negotiated thing anymore. They sat for a while. The oaks moved in the small evening wind. A chickadee found the feeder and made the particular sound they made when satisfied. The garden's doing well, she said. The tomatoes especially, he said. The ones in the back row. Those are going to be better than the ones from the store. A pause. Mama always said homegrown tomatoes tasted like tomatoes actually should. That store tomatoes were just the idea of a tomato. He turned to look at her sideways. She was looking at the garden, at her rows, at the small markers with their precise handwriting. She was right about that, he said. Lily opened her sketchbook. She looked at the page she'd been working on without drawing anything, just looking. The light was getting low enough that drawing would be difficult soon, but she wasn't drawing yet, just sitting with the open book. He didn't ask what she was thinking. He'd learned, over 12 months, that Lily said what she had to say when she'd completed the internal version of it, and that asking before then didn't speed the process and sometimes interrupted it. After a minute, she said, I've been thinking about Mama's notebook. What about it? The recipes. She turned a page in her sketchbook, then back. There are more in there, not just the sweet potato thing. She had one for the soup she made when we were sick, and the bread thing she made in winter. She paused. I want to make them, the ones in there, Not all at once, but we can do that, he said. Some of them will probably not work the way she made them. She had the measurements in her head by the end. The notebook is just the beginning. We can try anyway. She was quiet again. Then she said, I think about her a lot. Still. I know, he said. Is that going to change? He thought about how to answer honestly. I think the shape of it changes, he said, not the fact of it. It probably stops being the first thing all the time and starts being something that's just there, part of how you carry things. Lily considered this. Is that what happened with you? He paused. I didn't know her long enough to have the right kind of grief, he said. What I have is more like regret for the time, and something else I don't have a clean word for. He thought about it. Being here helps, he said. You and Hazel. Being here helps. Lily looked at him. Not the evaluating look, not the data-gathering look. Something more direct and also more unguarded. The look he saw occasionally now, the one that Claire's directness lived in. You help too, she said, plainly, like a statement of observed fact. He looked at her for a moment. I'm trying, he said. I know, she said. That's the part that helps. She opened her sketchbook to a fresh page. The light was nearly gone now, the sky a deep blue above the oaks, the first few stars appearing at the edges. She held the pencil but didn't draw. They sat on the porch steps while the evening finished becoming itself. And inside the house, Hazel was explaining something to nobody in particular with a force and enthusiasm that carried clearly through the screen door, and the chickadee came back to the feeder once more before the dark. Neither of them moved to go inside yet. There was no hurry. There was dinner to make later and reading after that, and the ordinary architecture of the evening that Nathan could navigate now without checking his notes, without counting the steps. It was his life, the actual one, the one with weight to it and mess in it, and something in it that he would not trade. He sat beside his daughter on the porch steps and let the evening be what it was. 3 years after the letter arrived on a Thursday, Nathan Sterling turned 42 in a kitchen that smelled like burned sugar and ambition. The burned sugar was Hazel's fault, technically. She had decided, with the unilateral confidence she applied to most large decisions, that she would make her father's birthday cake from scratch rather than ordering it from Marigold's, and the process had gone well until the caramel layer, at which point things had developed a personality. Lily stood at a precise distance from the smoke, expression neutral in the way she'd perfected over years of living with Hazel's projects, occasionally offering technical observations that Hazel received and did not implement. You need to pull it off the heat earlier, Lily said. I know that now, Hazel said. I said it before. You said it at the same time as me. I said it first. Nathan came into the kitchen from the back porch, where he'd been on a call with David about a foundation quarterly, and took in the scene with the practiced equanimity of someone who had been living with these two for 3 years and had calibrated his responses accordingly. The smoke was not serious. The pan was salvageable. Hazel's expression was the one she wore when she was recalibrating rather than defeated, which meant she'd find a solution. Do you want me to... he started. No, Hazel said. The caramel is... I see it. If you add cream, you can sometimes... Nathan. She turned to look at him. She was 9 now, and the 9-year-old version of Hazel was somehow more itself than any previous version, more certain, more present, more Hazel in the specific way that people become more themselves when they've had enough time and stability to grow into their edges. I have it. He put his hands up and retreated to the doorway. Lily glanced at him from her position by the counter. Her look said, she does have it, mostly. He received this information and went back to the porch. Hazel did, in the end, have it. She salvaged the caramel with a technique she later refused to fully explain, and the cake emerged imperfect and slightly lopsided and genuinely one of the better things Nathan had eaten in recent memory, though he kept that assessment proportionate because Hazel already had a healthy sense of her own capabilities and did not require additional encouragement in that direction. They ate cake at the table that evening. The 3 of them, plus Donna, who had brought wine for herself and Nathan, and had observed the caramel crisis from her own doorway with the calm of someone who had seen cooking disasters across 6 decades and knew which ones mattered. After dinner, Hazel produced from her room a birthday card she'd made that was technically a card in the sense that it opened and had a message inside, but was also structurally more complex than most cards, involving a folded section that revealed a second message and what appeared to be a small inserted diagram. "It's a map," she said, when Nathan unfolded the diagram, "of all the places we've been together since you came." He looked at it. She'd drawn it in colored pencil on graph paper, to scale as best he could tell. Or a field at the center, lines radiating out to Beaufort, where Clara's grave was. To Milford, where Dr. Solis had his practice. To a beach they'd finally visited the previous summer. To a town 2 hours north, where they'd spent 3 days the previous spring because Hazel had read about a natural history museum and wanted to see the fossil collection. Small stars at each location. Her handwriting precise and small, labeling each one. "This is really good," he said. "It took me 4 drafts," she said. "The scale was hard." Lily, from across the table, said, "She measured everything with a ruler." A pause. 3 times. Hazel did not deny this. She watched Nathan look at the map with the particular attention she gave him when she'd made something she cared about, not performing indifference the way she sometimes did, but actually watching. He looked at all the small stars, the places they'd been, the geography of 3 years. "Thank you," he said. I'm going to keep this." Hazel nodded, satisfied. Lily picked up her fork and returned to the cake. Donna caught Nathan's eye across the table and gave him the look she reserved for moments that didn't need comment. He gave her the small nod back. They'd developed this language over 3 years. Efficient, complete, requiring nothing further. But the girls turned 9 in March. He planned it differently this year, not in the sense of doing more, but in the sense of paying attention to what they'd said, over the fall and winter, in the offhand ways that children signal what matters to them when they're not making formal requests. Hazel had mentioned twice that there was a pottery class at the art center in Milford that her friend Cooper's sister had done. Lily had said nothing directly about what she wanted, but had, in November, spent a long time looking at a photograph book about botanical illustration that Nathan had bought for the coffee table. Not as a gift, just because he'd seen it and thought it belonged in the house. He booked the pottery class for Hazel's birthday afternoon. For Lily, he found a botanical illustration workshop at the same art center, 2 weeks later, scheduled when Hazel was at a tournament for the academic bowl team she'd joined in January. So it was Lily's alone, not shared, not split. He hadn't announced either thing in advance. He told Hazel about the pottery class the morning of her birthday. She went silent for about 4 seconds, which was, for Hazel, the equivalent of someone else bursting into tears. "Cooper's sister said the clay is cold," she said, "when you first start." "That's what I've heard." "And you have to do it multiple times before it works. The first ones always collapse." "Most worthwhile things do," he said. She went to get her shoes with the focused energy of someone who needed to move before they could process something fully. He told Lily about the illustration workshop on the morning of the relevant Saturday. She read the description on the printed sheet he'd given her. He'd thought about that she'd want to read it herself rather than have it described. And she read it twice, quietly, the way she read things that mattered. "You scheduled it when Hazel's at the bowl tournament," she said. "So it's yours." She looked at the sheet. She looked at him. "Thank you," she said, which she meant. Lily didn't say thank you as a reflex. She said it when she meant it. "Let me know how it goes," he said. "I'll show you," she said. "I'll make something and show you." She did. 3 weeks later, she brought home a small study she'd done of a fern frond in graphite and watercolor wash, careful and accurate and not showy, done in the style she'd been developing quietly for 2 years. She put it on the kitchen table and stood beside it while he looked at it, not speaking, just standing. "This is serious work," he said. "It's a first attempt," she said. "The proportions on the right side are off." "They're a little off," he agreed. "The texture work is very good." She looked at it critically. The instructor said start with something simple, work toward the complex. A pause. "I'm going to do the oak tree next, the one in the backyard." "That's not simple." "No," she said, "but I've been looking at it long enough to know it." He got the fern study framed. She didn't ask him to. He just came home one afternoon with it framed, and he put it on the wall in the hallway where they passed it every day, and Lily saw it and looked at it for a moment, and then looked at him and said, "The frame is good," and went to her room, which was, he had learned over 3 years, a complete sentence swap. Dog. Vincent Cho had been CEO of Sterling Technologies for nearly 2 years when he called Nathan on a Tuesday morning in spring to say that the Singapore partnership had finalized, and the Q1 numbers were strong, and he wanted Nathan to know because it was Nathan's company and he'd want to know. Nathan was in the backyard at the time, doing something with the tomato cages that Lily had left a note about. The left cage is leaning, it's going to fall. And he listened to Vincent and said the right things and meant them. He was glad the Singapore deal was done. He was glad Vincent was running things with the competence Nathan had seen in him for years and finally given the room to use. He was glad the company was well. He also noticed, hanging up the phone, that he'd been more absorbed in the tomato cage problem than he'd been in the Singapore news, and that this did not distress him. He straightened the cage. Lily had been right. It had been leaning, and left to itself would have fallen and taken the plant with it. He staked it properly and stood back and looked at the row. The tomatoes were doing well, better than last year. Lily had done something different with the soil preparation that she'd researched over winter. He wasn't sure of the details, only that it had involved a library book and considerable thought, and a chart she'd made that lived in the kitchen drawer, and the plants were healthier than anything they'd grown before. He thought, standing in the backyard in the spring morning, about the man who had not known these plants existed, who had not known this yard existed, who had been standing at a desk in Seattle when the letter arrived and had sat down in the middle of the workday because something had cracked open in him and he hadn't known how to stand upright inside it yet. He thought about what had been required of him over 3 years, not the visible, citable things, the legal process, the restructuring, the foundation, the logistical machinery of moving a life, the other things, the ones that didn't have language built around them yet. The requirement of showing up when showing up was the only thing being asked, and doing it long enough that it stopped being asked and started being assumed. The requirement of being wrong, regularly, about specific things, the beach trip, the mood read on a Tuesday, the time he'd tried to problem solve something that needed only to be witnessed, and being corrected by people half his size, and not letting the correction damage the relationship, because being corrected by your children meant they trusted you enough to correct you. The requirement of sitting with grief that wasn't his own, holding space for 2 small people who had lost the person who made the world make sense, and not trying to replace what was lost because it couldn't be replaced, only slowly, incompletely, imperfectly accompanied. He'd read somewhere, in the months after custody, that the main thing children needed from parents was what the author called reliable presence. Not perfect presence, not optimal presence, just there, consistently, over time, in a way that could be counted on. He'd read it and thought it sounded simple and had discovered that simple was not the same as easy, and that the gap between those 2 things was where most of the actual work lived. He was still in that gap. He expected to be in it for the foreseeable future. He went inside and made coffee and started the morning. And that was the day the same as most days. And that was also the point. Margaret Sterling came to Orfield in June. Not her first visit. She'd been twice more since that first Thanksgiving-adjacent Saturday, each visit a little less careful, a little more itself. She and Hazel had developed a genuine relationship that surprised Nathan, and probably should not have, since both of them ran on high engagement energy and preferred to be in charge of most situations and found each other, in some functional way, recognizable. They'd had a conversation during the second visit about the board structure of nonprofit organizations that Nathan had accidentally overheard, and that he'd had to set down what he was doing to fully appreciate. His mother explaining governance structures to his 9-year-old with the seriousness of someone who respected the attention she was receiving. With Lily, it was slower. Lily's relationships moved at Lily's pace and always had, but there was the drawing on Margaret's desk, framed. And there had been a moment during the second visit when Lily had shown Margaret the botanical illustration of the fern without being asked to, which was the Lily equivalent of a significant gesture, and Margaret had looked at it the way she'd looked at the drawing at that first meeting, with something unguarded, and had said, "You see things very precisely." and Lily had said, "I try," and that had been enough for both of them for then. The June visit was longer, 4 days. Margaret stayed at a bed and breakfast on the edge of town rather than the house, which was the right call. Nathan's house was not set up for guests in a way that would accommodate his mother's particular requirements, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so. On the third afternoon of the visit, Nathan left Margaret and the girls at the house and went to meet with Dr. Russo for a foundation update. When he came back 2 hours later, he found the three of them at the kitchen table with a construction project of some kind spread across it. Paper, tape, something structural taking shape. "What's this?" he said. "We're building a model of a cell," Hazel said, without looking up. "A eukaryotic cell," Margaret clarified. She was, he noted, wearing an apron. He had not previously seen his mother in an apron. "Lily's doing the nucleus," Hazel said. "I'm doing the mitochondria. Margaret is doing the endoplasmic reticulum because it's complicated and she wanted the complicated part." "Of course she did," Nathan said. Margaret looked up at him. Her expression was the one she used when she was aware of being observed and was not entirely comfortable with it, but was proceeding anyway. Not performing warmth, just being present in a situation she hadn't known she wanted to be in. "I'll make dinner," Nathan said. "Please," Margaret said, "and make something real. The girls have been humoring my nutritional preferences for 2 days. Hazel said, "She doesn't eat pasta." "I eat pasta," Margaret said. "In small quantities." "That's not the same as eating pasta. It is literally the same." Nathan went to make dinner, actual pasta, a full portion, and left them to the eukaryotic cell, and listened to the three voices in the next room negotiate the relative complexity of cellular organelles, and was aware of being in a moment he could not have predicted from any previous point in his life. And that was, for all its imperfection, exactly where it should be. That's all. The summer Hazel and Lily turned 9, Donna Hartley fell and broke her wrist. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. She'd been in her own garden, a root had caught her foot, and she'd gone down hard and come up with a wrist that needed a cast and a following 2 weeks of revised mobility. She did not make much of it. Donna Hartley did not make much of most things, which was one of the central facts of her character, and one that Nathan had come to understand as both strength and, occasionally, a thing that needed counterbalancing. The girls found out before Nathan did. Hazel heard from Cooper's mother, who had heard from someone on Donna's street. Hazel arrived home from school that afternoon with the particular energy she carried when she'd determined that something required action and she was identifying the action. "Donna broke her wrist," she announced. "I know," he said. He'd gotten the call from Donna herself an hour earlier. "She's okay. It's a clean fracture." "She can't cook," Hazel said. "Not well, for a while." "So we cook for her." It was not a request. Hazel had done the analysis and reached the conclusion and was now informing him of the decision. He looked at her. "You want to cook for Donna?" "We should. She cooked for us." "Before." Hazel set her backpack down with the definitive motion she used to signal that a conversation was settled. "Can we start tonight?" Lily, who had come in behind Hazel with less announcement, said, "I already looked at the notebook." He looked at her. "Clara's notebook. There's a soup in there, the one she made when we were sick." She paused. "I thought about it before. I've been thinking about trying it." She looked at her hands briefly. "For Donna." Something about the specific arrangement of this, Lily reaching for Clara's soup recipe to take care of the woman who had taken care of them, had a quality that Nathan recognized as significant, and that he did not try to articulate because the right response to certain things was not articulation. "Let's look at it together," he said. They made the soup, all three of them, which made the kitchen more complicated than it needed to be, but also more alive. The notebook recipe was incomplete in the way Lily had predicted. The quantities approximate, notes in the margins that required interpretation. Hazel interpreted the measurements with more boldness than was strictly accurate. Lily tasted as they went and made corrections with the focus of someone following an internal map. The soup in the end was good, not identical to what Clara had made. None of them could know if it was or wasn't, but good in the way that food is good when it was made with actual attention. They brought it to Donna in the two containers they'd decided on, and Donna looked at the containers and then at the girls and said, "What's in it?" And Lily said, "The notebook one." And Donna's face did something that she redirected quickly into practicality, asking whether they'd added the time, which Lily confirmed they had. They had dinner with Donna that evening at her kitchen table, the four of them, eating the soup with bread that Nathan had managed not to burn, in the kitchen where so much of everything had started. Donna ate 2 bowls. She didn't say much about the soup except that the time level was correct, which from Donna was the kind of praise you kept. After dinner, driving home in the car, Hazel said from the back seat, "The soup was good." "It was," Nathan said. "We should write down what we did, while we remember, so the recipe is more complete." "We can do that." "Lily, do you remember the amounts?" "Mostly," Lily said. She was looking out the window. "Some of it I did by feel." "That's not helpful for writing it down." "I know, but that's what Mama would have done." Hazel was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," she said. "Probably." They drove the rest of the way home through the warm summer evening, and nobody said anything else, and nobody needed to. It was early September when Lily finished the oak tree illustration. She'd been working on it since spring, in the way she worked on things that mattered, not constantly, but returning to it with the consistency of someone who knew what they were building toward and wasn't in a hurry to get there incorrectly. She'd made studies first, individual leaves, sections of bark, the way the root system expressed itself above ground. She'd looked at the tree in every light and made notes in a small sketchbook she kept in her jacket pocket. She worked on it in the morning sometimes, before school, sitting at the back window. Nathan didn't ask how it was going. He'd learned when to ask and when to let the work be the work. She put it on the kitchen table on a Saturday morning in September. It was large. She'd worked on heavier paper, larger format than her usual, and the illustration filled it. The oak in the backyard, rendered with the precision and care she brought to everything, but also with something else that was harder to name. A quality of having looked at the thing long enough to understand it from the inside, not just observed it from the outside. "It's done," she said. He sat down at the table. He looked at it for a long time without speaking. She stood across from him, not waiting anxiously, just standing, the way she stood when something was complete and she was letting it be what it was. "Lily," he said. "The roots were the hardest part," she said. "I could only see some of them. I had to infer the rest." "What did you infer from?" "What's above the ground, the size of the tree, where it leans." She tilted her head. "If you understand the visible part well enough, the invisible part follows." He looked at her across the table. She was 9 years old and she'd just said something about oak tree root systems that was also true about almost everything else, and she'd said it as a matter of botanic observation, which was completely, entirely, Lily. "It's the best thing you've made," he said. She looked at it critically. "The shading on the east side is a little flat." "It is, a little. It's still the best thing you've made." She considered this. "Okay," she said. "Where should it go?" He looked around the house in his head. He thought about the hallway, where the fern study was. He thought about his office. Then he thought about the right place, the one that was actually right. "In the living room," he said. "Main wall. So it's the first thing you see when you come in." She thought about this. She looked at the drawing. She looked back at him. "Okay," she said. "That's good." Clara's memorial garden was Lily's idea. She raised it in October at dinner in the matter-of-fact way she raised most of her ideas, not asking permission exactly, more establishing a proposal as reasonable and waiting for concurrence. "There's a corner of the backyard by the fence," she said. "By my garden, but not in it. I want to plant something there for Mama. Not just one thing, a whole small garden." She looked at her plate. She liked wildflowers, and she liked things that came back every year without you doing much. So things that are good at surviving. A pause. "I've been researching." "I thought you might have," Nathan said. "There are natives that would work, coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, wild bergamot. They spread on their own over time." She looked at him. "The corner gets good light. It would work." Hazel, who had been listening, said, "Can I help plant it?" Lily looked at her. The consideration was real. She was particular about her garden space. You can plant the back row, she said. The bergamot. It's harder to mess up. Hazel accepted these terms. They planted it on a Saturday in late October, the three of them in the backyard with a tray of starts Lily had sourced from a native plant nursery 40 minutes away. The day was cold and overcast and completely right for digging, the ground soft from recent rain. Hazel planted the bergamot with more enthusiasm than technique, but adequate results. Lily placed each plant with the same precision she brought to her drawings, pressing the soil with both hands, making sure. Nathan dug holes when Lily told him to and placed plants when she positioned them and stood back when she needed him to stand back. This was the division of labor they'd arrived at, him and Lily. She designed, he executed what she needed executed. He stayed out of what she was handling herself. When the planting was done, they stood back and looked at the corner. Right now it was just small plants in turned earth, not impressive, not yet. It would take a season before it looked like anything, 2 before it looked like what Lily had described. It's going to spread, Lily said. By next fall, it'll be bigger. Good, Nathan said. She looked at the corner for another moment. She would have liked it, she said. She liked things that spread on their own. She used to say that the best things in life didn't need managing. She might have had a point. Lily looked at him sideways. She wasn't always right about everything. No, nobody is. She was right about most things. A pause. More than most people. He nodded. They went inside for lunch. The kitchen smelled like the soup Hazel had started before they went out. A version of Clara's recipe that had evolved through 4 attempts into something that was now, definitively, theirs. And Nathan set the table while the girls washed their hands and argued mildly about whether Hazel had gone beyond her designated planting area, which she had, slightly, and which Lily had noticed and catalogued for later reference. The birthday that mattered most to Nathan, in the private accounting he kept of which moments had changed the shape of something, was not his own. It was the girls' 10th in March of the following year. They were 10. He had known them for 4 years. 4 years was, he sometimes thought, long enough to know a person in the specific way that daily life builds knowledge. Not the deep archive of someone who had known them from the beginning, but something real, something layered. He knew how Hazel sounded when she was tired versus when she was bored. He knew that Lily ate more when she was working through something difficult, not less, which was the opposite of what he'd been told to watch for. He knew that both of them, on the anniversary of Clara's death, needed the day to be the same as any other day on the surface, and that underneath the surface they were doing something private and necessary, and that his job was to make sure the surface held. He took the day off, not a scheduled off day, a decided one, the way he'd learned to make decisions like this without extensive analysis. They went to Beaufort in the morning before the party, which was Lily's reversal of the previous year's order. She'd thought about it, she'd said, and she wanted the visit to be first this year, not last. The wildflowers on Clara's grave were from the garden. Lily had cut them herself that morning, before Nathan was up. He'd found her in the backyard in the early light with the scissors, careful, selecting. At the cemetery, Hazel and Lily stood at the grave together. Nathan stood back, the way he always did. He looked at the stone. She meant what she said, and thought, for the 1000th time, how completely accurate that was. Hazel talked out loud sometimes, at the grave, told Clara things. She did it without self-consciousness, the way she did most things. Today she said, "We're 10 now. We planted your garden. The coneflowers came back twice already." A pause. "Nathan burned the birthday cake last year, but he got it right this year, so there's improvement." Lily didn't talk out loud. She stood beside Hazel and held her own silence and put her hand on the base of the stone the way she had the first time, briefly, before she stood up. On the way back to the car, she walked beside Nathan. "I've been thinking about something," she said. "Okay." She made a choice, to not tell you. She was looking at the path. She was scared. I understand that. A pause. "But we lost time, all 3 of us." She stopped walking for a moment. He stopped with her. "I used to be angry about it. Not at her. At the situation." He waited. "I'm not angry anymore," she said. I think I understand it better now. She did what she could with what she had. She looked at him. And you came. When you knew. I did. That matters, she said. That you came. He looked at her. His daughter, who had been a child watching him from behind her sister's shoulder 4 years ago, who had told him she wanted a window, who had grown into someone whose precision of mind and depth of attention and capacity for exact honesty were among the most remarkable things he'd encountered in 4 decades on this earth. I couldn't not come, he said, when I knew. I know, she said. I know you couldn't. She started walking again. That's the part I hold on to, that some people can't not come. He walked beside her back to the car, and he thought about what she'd said, and he thought about Clara, and about the choice Clara had made from fear and the choice he'd made from, he didn't know exactly what. Instinct. Something that had moved faster than calculation. Something that had sat him down in the middle of a workday and had not, in any of the 4 years since, let him stand back up and walk away. There were things he would have done differently. He would have been a different person at 32 if he'd known. He would have been, perhaps, a person Clara would have chosen to trust. He didn't know. He'd never know. The could-have-been version of the story was not the one he lived in, and he'd made his peace with that not once but repeatedly, the way you make peace with irreversible things. Not finally, not completely, but again and again each time it came up, until the repetition itself became a kind of answer. What he knew was this. He was here. He had been here for 4 years, imperfectly, daily actually. He had burned the toast and read 26 chapters of a dragon book and straightened a tomato cage on a Tuesday morning and driven an hour 40 to a cardiologist 4 times and refilled a bird feeder in bare feet on a cold porch and learned, slowly, the grammar of 2 particular people who were his and who had taught him things about himself that no amount of business success had managed to reach. He was not a better businessman for it. He was a different man for it. He was, he thought, more himself for it than he had been in the 41 years before the letter arrived. Maltz. The party was at the house. 10-year-olds had different requirements than 7-year-olds. Less chaos, more structure. A specific requested playlist that Hazel had spent 2 weeks assembling and that she monitored during the party with the focused attention of a sound engineer. Lily had asked for 1 table with drawing supplies, set aside from the main party, available for people who wanted it. 3 kids ended up at the drawing table for most of the afternoon. Lily joined them for a while. She didn't manage them. She just drew alongside. Donna was there. Margaret had come down from San Francisco. She'd started making the trip 3 times a year, which was the rhythm that had settled naturally, often enough to be present, and not so often that it overwhelmed the shape of the household. She and Hazel had been in a running discussion about nonprofit board governance since November, which was neither of their best ideas and also exactly their shared idea. Nathan had stopped trying to contextualize it. At some point in the late afternoon, when the party had moved into its final phase and the remaining children were spread across the backyard in the configuration that meant the event was winding down on its own, Nathan stood on the back porch with Donna beside him, both of them with glasses of something cold, watching the yard. Hazel was explaining something to Cooper with the emphatic gestures she used when she was certain about something, which was most of the time. Margaret was at the drawing table, looking at what one of the kids was working on, her expression the one she'd been growing into. Less managed, more present. Lily was in the corner by the memorial garden, by herself. She was looking at the coneflowers, which were in their 2nd spring and had spread the way she'd said they would, wider and fuller than last year. She crouched down and looked at something close to the ground. A new growth. A seedling. Something establishing itself. She looked up and saw Nathan watching her. She didn't look away or signal anything in particular. She just looked at him for a moment, across the yard, across the party, across 4 years of mornings and evenings and all the ordinary days between. Then she turned back to the garden, satisfied by whatever she'd found. Donna said, "She's going to be a scientist." "Or an artist," Nathan said. "Both," Donna said. "Why not both?" He looked at the yard, at his daughters, at the garden Clara would never see, that Lily had planted because she missed her, and that was spreading on its own now the way Lily had said it would, because she'd understood the plants and the soil and the light well enough to know what they needed and had provided it. He thought about something she'd said, crouching over the oak tree drawing a year ago. If you understand the visible part well enough, the invisible part follows. He thought about what he understood now that he hadn't in the beginning. He understood that love was not a thing you felt and then expressed. It was a thing you built by showing up, by being wrong and correcting yourself, by reading someone's silence and not trying to fill it with your own comfort. It was built in the bird feeder and the tomato cage and the chair by the bookshelf where you sat to read out loud badly and then got better at it. It was built in the late nights and the hard mornings and every ordinary Tuesday that didn't look like anything from the outside and was everything from the inside. He'd built a company that employed thousands of people and changed the way several industries organized their information and generated enough money that the amount was difficult to fully conceptualize. He'd done that, and it was real, and it had mattered to him, and it still did. But standing on the porch in the March light, on the afternoon of his daughter's 10th birthday, watching Lily crouch in the memorial garden she'd planted for her mother and Hazel, arguing tournament brackets with Cooper and Margaret at the drawing table, looking at a child's work with genuine attention, he knew what the actual thing was, the one that weighed the most, the one he would have traded everything else for if the math had ever required it. He'd arrived in a town he hadn't known existed. For two children he hadn't known were his, and he'd stayed. He'd stayed because he couldn't not stay, and then he'd stayed because he wanted to, and then he'd stayed because it was simply his life, the actual one, the one that mattered. He hadn't done it perfectly. He hadn't done it gracefully. He'd done it daily, imperfectly, with full presence, over time. And when he stood on the porch in the afternoon light of their 10th birthday, the greatest success of his life was not behind him, somewhere in a boardroom, on a balance sheet, in a Forbes profile. It was in the yard in front of him, growing. It had always been growing, even when he didn't know it existed. That, he thought, was the thing about real things. They don't wait for you to be ready. They grow in the dark, in the quiet, in the years before you arrive. And when you finally find them, the work is not to deserve them. The work is to stay, to keep staying, to make the choice every day that this, the imperfect, complicated, irreplaceable this, is the one you came for. He put his glass down on the porch railing. He went out into the yard to be with his daughters, and the afternoon closed around them, and they stepped forward together into whatever came next, carrying what they'd lost and what they'd built, and the whole complicated weight of being a family. Not the perfect kind, but the real kind, which had turned out to be the only kind worth having.